20. The man that sicko wanted us to kill lived at 1227 Sunrise Street in Beverly Hills. That was all we learned from the distorted male voice that called my home phone at 10 o'clock Monday night. 2 days of dread hadn't brought Keith or me any closer to a better understanding of the note he'd left with the boy Jeremy, the words of which were permanently inscribed in my fractured brain. You will kill the man. If he's alive in 4 days, both Danny and that scumbag you're with are dead. He crossed the wrong man. P.S. Cut off another one of the boy's fingers. Remind him that if he tells anyone about what happened to him, we will kill his mother. We knew we were being watched, but we hadn't cut off another one of the boy's fingers. On this point we felt compelled to call sicko's bluff. We freed Jeremy from the warehouse, helped him into the backseat of my car, and drove him to Santa Monica. He'd leaned against the door, silent and numb for most of the ride, and all I could do was rest my hand on his knee and promise him that he was safe now. We would find who did this and make him pay, I said. We were this devil's victims too. I was so very, very sorry. None of what I said did anything to settle my mind, because the fact was, Jeremy had lost more than his finger. He'd lost a part of his innocence through abuse, just like I had before Danny had saved me. As we drove, Keith was the one who finally brought up the thread in the note. I know this has all been a nightmare, Jeremy, but I need to know if there's anything else you can tell us about this man. The boy sat mute, staring absently at his hand, which we'd wrapped in a clean white rag from my trunk. Anything at all, Keith pressed. Besides the fact that he wore a ski mask and gloves. What kind of car he drove, maybe. He put a bag over my head, Jeremy said. I couldn't see. I felt nauseated. His abductors had evidently chosen him at random, an easy target riding his skateboard in an alleyway near his house in Pasadena. A club to the head, a bag, and that was all he could remember. When he woke, his finger was missing. He'd spent the next several days in a dark room, mostly sleeping under the influence of the drugs they'd given him to keep him quiet. We drove on for a bit before Keith continued, glancing up at the rearview mirror. He made a thread in the note he left us. Did he say anything to you about that? The boy looked out the window. He said I couldn't tell anyone or he would kill my mother. Keith glanced at me in the mirror. That's going to be hard, Jeremy. I know how difficult this is, but I think he means it. Your family and the police will want to know everything about how you were taken, exactly what happened, about us everything. But he cut off your finger, which means he's serious about what he says. Does that make sense? Yes. You'll have to tell them something, I understand that. You don't have any information that could lead them to whoever did this, so it is probably okay to tell them what you know, that you were taken and you don't know why. But if you say anything about the note, or about us, I think whoever did this might carry out his threats. It was true. Sicko knew that if the boy led the police to us, we could lead them to Randall. We were the link that could incriminate him. Tell the police that whoever took you brought you back and dropped you off a block from home. Don't tell them about the warehouse or about us. I know that may not sound right to you, but I can't think of a better way to go. Trust me, we'll get to the bottom of this, and when it is safe everything will come out. Until then, you can't say anything about us. Fair enough. Yes. My heart was already broken, but I saw myself in Jeremy's shoes, and it was everything I could do to remain calm. I gave him a long hug and helped him out of the car a block from his house in a low-rent district on the east side of Pasadena. We followed him at distance until he entered a duplex, safe. But really, he wasn't safe. Neither was Danny. Only 2 days had passed between the time we drove away from Jeremy's house and the time we drove up to the large white house on Sunrise Street. Lights. I did. Turn the engine off. I looked at him, then up the driveway at the house, which was lit by an array of exterior lamps affixed to the stucco walls. 2 white pillars bordered a tall arched ironwork door. Using Google's satellite view, we'd zoomed in on the house, complete with red adobe tiles on a dozen roof lines. It was clear then that our target was wealthy. But we still didn't know who owned the property or who we were supposed to kill, only that he lived here. My palms on the wheel were clammy with sweat. I think we should leave it running, I said. We might need to get out quick. Saving the 3 seconds it takes to start the car isn't worth the risk. Risk of what? It's Beverly Hills. These are public streets. A cop comes by and wonders why the car's running. No, turn it off. So I did. What time is it? 11:51. We have 9 minutes. So I just go up and knock on the door, right? Heath reached back and grabbed my black kit. Just like we agreed. You go to the front door. I hold back until the door's open. Assuming you're still good with that. Was I? The plan was mine, dredged up from my better days with Danny. He would have insisted on a thorough surveillance, but the timing Sicko had given us didn't allow for that. The homeowner probably wouldn't see any threat in a skinny girl like me dressed in Miss Me jeans and a bright blue blouse. Once he had the door open, Heath, who was dressed in black, would step in from the side with his gun and force the man back in the house. Looking at the house, I was having second thoughts. We didn't even know if the owner had a wife in there, our daughters, our guards, our dogs. What if he's the wrong man? Heath pulled out his gun and chambered around. Whoever's pulling our strings is too meticulous in his planning for that. The man they want is in that house, guaranteed. And then what? I asked. And then you leave it up to me. I don't like it. I don't either, but trust me, it is the best way. Go in fast and hard and control the situation. Something about the look of that fortress struck me as odd. Maybe it was my frazzled nerves, maybe my suspicious nature, maybe my fear of bedbugs and rats. I don't know. There was too much we didn't know about our target. Too many things that could go wrong. I knew that as a cop Keith had been through his share of similar situations, but nothing had gone right for us so far. And we'd failed to follow the instructions on the last note. It was suddenly all happening too fast. What would Danny do? I'd asked that question 100 times in the last 2 days, but staring at the house, a part of me saw our present situation differently. My instinct to start out with deception was good, but the part about barging in with guns drawn wasn't sitting right. We didn't know enough. Danny would already be on the perimeter circling the house. He would be patient. He would find a weakness first and then exploit it, right? You ready? Heath asked. Read the note again, I said. He turned his head. We've been over this. I have OCD. He stared at me, then pulled the note out of his pocket, fished a penlight out of my kit, and read the note under its light. At midnight Monday night you will go to an address I will give you. You will force a full confession from the owner of the house and learn where he put the money. If he refuses, you will kill him and wait for my next instructions. If he confesses, you will have 48 hours to retrieve the money. Once you have the money, you will return and kill the man and wait for my instructions. Either way, you will kill the man. If he's alive in 4 days, both Danny and that scumbag you're with are dead. Single quote. He lowered the note. You know what I'm thinking, I said, eyes still on the house. This isn't about the money. Whoever lives in that house has all the money Randall could want. He doesn't need us to get it. He could find another way. We've been over that too. Randall doesn't know who he can trust on the outside anymore. The money, why does Sicko want him dead? We don't know. His voice took on a frustrated bite. We don't know squat. You don't think I know that? That's what I'm saying, we don't know. We know Sicko's enraged about something Danny did. Revenge. You kill this man, you take the blame, you go to prison. It's his way of messing with Danny. I'm not going to kill him, I said. You sure about that? I didn't answer. It still didn't make complete sense to me. There was something else we didn't understand in play. Maybe that was what made me rethink the whole barging in thing. Whoever was in the house might be our only real shot at getting to Sicko. Like you said, we need to know more, I said. We don't have time to know more. I glanced at my phone. 3 minutes till midnight. My heart was racing. Danny's first rule had always been to know your target, and the best way to do that now was on the inside of that house. Not with guns blazing. I'm going in first, I said. I grabbed the kid off his lap. Pulled out my knife. Stuffed it and the mace into my pockets. Give me 5 minutes. You can't go in there alone and unarmed. I'm not going in with a gun. We need to know who this guy is before we do anything. The second he sees a gun, he sees us as a threat. I need to know who he is before that. Then let me go in first. No, he'll see you as a threat. Me, he sees as a lost girl looking for some help. That's your plan now. Go in looking for directions. I took a deep breath and opened my door. My desperation gave way to a kind of fatal hopelessness. What would Danny do? He would do whatever was necessary to save me. I had to save Danny, and the only way was to know his enemy. I'm going in, Keith. I have to. Wait for me outside and be ready. Ready for what? A smoke signal? I don't know. I put my foot on the street and stepped outside. I'll think of 10. Wait for me, Renee. I shut the door on his voice and hurried toward the house. I'd done this before. I could do it again. I had to. For Danny's sake, I had to. 21. The pills the warden gave Danny were a sedative, a powerful narcotic that began to pull at his mind within 10 minutes. Not a numbing drug, but a sleeping agent, which made sense if Danny understood the warden's intentions as well-meaning. He'd been through a nightmare. It would be good for him to sleep it off so that he could face whatever came the next day. But Danny could not understand any such benevolence on Marshall Pape's part. Or could he? Yes, actually he could. From Pape's point of view, everything he was doing was well-meaning. There was simply a disparity between his and Danny's understanding of well. In Pape's world, it would do Danny well to conform to the punishment he'd earned. Breaking Danny would do the world well. Any suffering was well-deserved, as was the suffering of every member in this sanctuary. These were the thoughts that mumbled through Danny's mind as he sat on the upper bunk, looking at Godfrey, who watched him with the gentle eyes of a man who knew more than he was willing to say. He wants you out cold. I can see it in your eyes, Godfrey said, reaching for one of his books on the locker. I don't know what you've done, priest, but I've never seen the warden so fixated on breaking a man, not in the first week. Godfrey faced him. So tell me, what did you really do? The older man's image grew fuzzy for a moment, then came back into clear focus. I told you. I killed some people. No, that's not it. There's something else. I don't know what, but you did. Indeed truly cross the wrong man. The question is, why does the warden want you out cold now? I've seen a lot of things in my time, but I've never seen him help an inmate sleep. Danny had been transferred to the prison 8 days earlier, and in the space of that week he had spent 2 days in the hole, 2 days in deep meditation, and 2 days in the infirmary, leaving him only 1 day in general population. This all without so much as lifting a finger or raising his voice to harm a soul. But that was precisely the problem, wasn't it? Like a loving father, the warden meant to flush out all of Danny's deepest, darkest, most violent impulses and lay them bare in the light of his own justice, so that Danny might be transformed into the kind of man who never again deviated from society's rules. And tonight that loving father had given him 2 pills to put him to sleep. He wants to break me, Danny said. Break you from what? I used to kill my enemies. The drug was flooding his veins now, pulling his mind lower into darkness. He wants to break you from killing your enemies. Danny felt his head shaking, slowly. No. He put his hand on the edge of the mattress to steady himself. I took a vow to love my enemies, he said. His tongue felt thick. I don't think he likes that. Godfrey held his eyes steady. When he spoke, his voice was knowing. So he wants you to expose you. The bastard wants to justify his punishment of you by making you do it again. He wants to turn you back into a monster in his monster factory. It wasn't a new thought for Danny, but hearing it so clearly, he felt a stab of panic penetrate his foggy mind. But darkness can't drive out darkness, only light can do that, Godfrey said. Hate can't drive out hate, only love can do that. Martin Luther King said that. Yes, Danny remembered saying. And then he remembered nothing. Not what, if anything, Godfrey said next. Not lying down, not falling asleep. He wasn't even aware that he was on his bunk, dead to Basil, drifting through a peaceful world in which he had no enemies. Time drifted by, bringing with it vague images and whispers that were gone the moment they appeared. From the fog emerged a vision. Peter was there, smiling, holding out a plate with chocolate cake on it. Where? Danny didn't know. Just there, right in front of him. Beaming. Do you want some, Danny? If you're good, you can come to my room and we can eat some cake. I would like that, Peter. I would like that very much. I will never hurt a girl again, Danny. It was a strange proclamation, but not so strange in the fabric of a dream. Did you hurt her? Danny asked. The warden said I did. Tears flooded the boy's eyes. I don't want to go back into the room. The smile returned to Peter's face. He held up the chocolate cake. It's okay, Danny, we can eat cake now. I'm good now. Another voice spoke. Danny. The female voice was etched into his mind. For all time. He turned and saw that Renee was standing there, in his dream, looking at him. With her clear eyes. Immediately that ancient warmth of hope and affection flooded his chest, swelling through his throat and face. In his mind he was running for her, throwing his arms around her and swinging her through the air as she laughed. Why haven't you done that, Danny? Why haven't you called her and wept on her shoulder and told her how deep the ache in your heart runs? Then he saw her face and his heart froze. There were tears on her cheeks. Danny, she said, I can't find you, Danny. I'm here, darling. Right here. She stared at him and swallowed deeply. Are you doing well? Yes. He wanted to say. But he couldn't form the word. And are they treating you well? Yes, my darling. Yes. But he couldn't speak. Because in truth he wasn't well. In truth he was falling. In truth he was melting down. Standing there in his dream, facing the woman he loved more than his own life, he realized that he was afraid. That he was terrified. 22. I walked up the 3 steps that led to the mansion's glass and ironwork door, fingers tingling, and without allowing even a pause, I rang the illuminated doorbell button that was set in a brass intercom. I assured myself that I was safe. Apart from the knife and mace in my pockets, I wasn't packing threatening weapons and I had no intention of leaping on anyone with fists flying. I was only a lost soul who desperately needed to use a phone because the one in my back pocket was dead. My presence was totally innocent. Nothing strange, nothing crazy, nothing but me being neurotic, and there was no crime against that. I rang the bell again, and this time I saw light come to life past the glass. Clean, sparkling glass. This was it. I stepped back, heart pounding, but otherwise calm and collected. Not counting my fingers, which were trembling. I shoved my mace deeper in my right pocket so it wouldn't stick out. Can I help you? The low male voice spoke over the intercom, startling me. Yes, I'm sorry, but I was wondering if you could help me. I need help. A pause. It's midnight. What help? I need to make a call. I'm sorry. I know this is strange, but my phone's battery died and I think I might be in trouble. I have to make a call. I couldn't find a gas station or anything. It's midnight, he said again. You don't understand. My husband is in terrible trouble. I have to make a call. Please. I'm a respectable girl who needs a helping hand. Just 1 minute, I promise. The intercom was silent. I was about to push the button again when a figure distorted by the angular glass stepped into the dim light inside, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open a foot. A tall man with a goatee stared at me through round spectacles. He was maybe 50 or older, dressed in casual black slacks and a turtleneck, and he didn't look anything like a drug dealer. The phone? He asked. Yes, please. I also need to use the bathroom, I said quickly. His right eyebrow arched. Unless you'd rather I pee in your bushes. Look, I've been out here for an hour and I'm sorry, but I really have to pee. He hesitated, then opened the door. Please hurry. The phone's in the kitchen. Thank you. I stepped in, and just like that I was in the house of the man Sicko wanted. Keith and me to kill. Looking around, I didn't see anything remotely threatening, much less piles of guns or cocaine. The house was mostly dark, but in the shadows sat expensive furnishings made of leather. Brass lamps with animal hides for shades, large oil paintings on the walls. It was the kind of decor you'd expect to see in a colonial mansion in Beverly Hills, I supposed. To my right, a twisting staircase rose to a catwalk. Living room dead ahead. Kitchen to my left. An office or a library next to the kitchen. A clean house. I liked that, but my fingers were still trembling. I stuck out my hand. My name's Renee Gilmore. He studied my eyes without taking my hand and I immediately withdrew it. Thinking he would notice how clammy it was. I thought you needed to make a phone call. I do. And pee. Then use it. He indicated the archway leading into what I could see was the kitchen. The bathroom's down the hall to the left. He nodded at a hallway next to the kitchen entry. Thank you. Worst case, I could slip into the bathroom and call Keith. The man didn't seem to know my name, and we wouldn't be meeting armed drug lords. The man we were to kill seemed entirely respectable, not the person I'd imagined trying to force a confession out of over the last 2 days. Was he alone? I headed for the kitchen. Sorry for bothering you, I'll be out in a second. Make it quick, he snapped. I stopped and turned back, determined to take him off guard. Look, I've had a hard night. You're nice and comfortable in your mansion here, but there's a world of hurt out there. Please, some kindness would be nice. I just need to use your phone and pee. We should be thankful we have running water. You have a family. Yes. And you're afraid I'll wake them. No, I'm here alone. Do I look like a thug who's going to rob you? I don't know, are you? Of course not. Then why are you carrying a knife and mace? I blinked at him, surprised he'd laid me bare so easily. My security system scans for more than movement, dear. There's more to this house than meets the eyes. He'd used something like one of those airport scanners on me. Keith wouldn't have made it in. It also explained why it had taken him so long to answer the door. He was checking my naked self out on some monitor. Was that even legal? A knife and mace are common sense for a girl like me. In this neighborhood. I'm not from this neighborhood. And if you don't mind me asking, what kind of person has an airport scanner hooked up outside their house? A man with many enemies. You don't look like the kind who hurts people. Why would you have many enemies? Because I'm a judge, dear. The kind who puts very bad people behind bars. A judge. My pulse quickened. For a brief moment all I could think was that I was looking directly into the eyes of Sicko himself. But that made no sense. Was this the judge who could be furious with Danny for killing his son, the pedophile? No, that couldn't be. Nobody but Danny, and I even knew about that judge, so how could he be connected to Randell? More likely this was the judge who'd sentenced Randell, in which case Keith would recognize him. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. A judge, huh, wow, that would make you pretty powerful. You ever hear of Basil? His face seemed to turn into stone for a moment. Or maybe I was just imagining it. You're right, we're not in the jungle, he said. We have phones, so please use mine and then leave. Now you're trying to get rid of me. You can understand why I find all of this a bit unusual. You come into my house with mace and a knife under the pretext of using my phone, but you seem more interested in the fact that we have flushing toilets in America and prisons. I think it is best that you just use the phone and leave. It is, after all, my home. So you do know about Basil? Because that's where my husband lives. He stared at me. Then I doubt you'll be getting through at this hour. What's this all about? Does the name Danny Hansen mean anything to you? This time I knew I wasn't imagining anything. His face did turn to stone. I think you should leave. He frowned. Now, I haven't made my phone call. I don't care. I would like you to leave now. My mind spun. I need to pee. And I dashed into the bathroom before he could object. I'd backed myself into a corner. But that didn't matter anymore. The man Sicko wanted us to kill was a judge familiar with the name Danny Hansen. I was a tight bundle of nerves as I closed the door of the small half-bath. Normally I would have lingered on thoughts about the cleanliness of that room. The sink, the toilet, the mirror, the toilet, the floor, the toilet. But all I could think as I flipped on the switch and stared at the image of skinny me in the mirror was that I was in the house of a judge who knew something about Danny. I had to know what and why and how, and I wouldn't leave until I did. What was his connection to Danny? What involvement did he have with Randell? What were his ties to Sicko? Why did Sicko want us to kill him? Why had he gone stiff when I mentioned Danny's name? How could he help me save Danny? I grabbed my phone from my back pocket and pressed the favorites button. With a shaking thumb, I thought to turn on the water in case the judge was listening. I had to get Keith in before the judge forced me out. Getting back inside the house would be difficult if not impossible. I pressed Keith's name and lifted the phone to my ear. Pick up, pick up, pick up, pick up. He did, on the second ring. Renee, what's happening? It occurred to me that my voice might carry beyond the door. The running water wasn't loud enough to cover it. Renee, are you there? I shoved the toilet's flush lever down. The toilet roared and I quickly whispered into the phone. Now, hurry. Renee, are you there? He couldn't hear me over the flushing toilet. The sound of the door squeaking behind me sent panic through my bones and I started to turn, but in that moment of raw alarm I remembered that I had the phone to my ear. So I dropped it. It plopped into the toilet and rattled around the whirlpool of flushing water. I spun around as the door swung wide. The judge stood in the opening, goatee jutting from his sharp chin, staring at me, arms down at his sides. There was a gun in his right hand. But he didn't lift his gun or threaten me with a scowl or scream at me. He was too resolute for that. He spoke in a calm voice that I could take as nothing less than a direct order. Leave this house, he said. I couldn't. I had to stall him. My phone fell out of my pocket. I said. It's in the toilet. Leave it. It's my phone. I can't just leave it. Hurry, Keith. He would be running. Maybe coming up to the door already. I had to let him know the judge was armed. Why are you holding a gun? I said, loud enough for my voice to ring in the small bathroom. You invite a girl into your house to use the bathroom and then you pull a gun on her. Are you going to rape me? The judge lifted his arm and pointed his gun at me. Get out of my house. Now. I lifted both hands shoulder high. Okay. Calm down. Just let me get my phone. phone. I began to reach for the toilet bowl. Leave it. Something snapped in my mind with those words. When he said leave it, all I heard was leave Danny, and that was sickening. I wasn't going to leave without this man's information or one of his bullets in my head. I'm not leaving my phone. I snapped. I said leave it. Get out. A vein stuck out on his temple where his sideburns were graying. You're going to murder me because of a phone. We stared each other down. House without a maniac and call my husband there. You weren't going to call your husband. He's in prison. He's not the one I was going to call. I don't know if I'm coming or going here because your gun is pointed at my head. I'm getting my phone. I lowered my hands. Shoot me in the back if you want. Judge kills skinny girl who dropped her phone in his toilet. That'll go over big. Lower the weapon. Heath's voice rang through the hallway, and the judge twisted his head to his right. Heath stepped into view and held his gun to the man's head. Put it down. Now. The judge slowly lowered his arm. What's the meaning of this? The meaning of this, I said, stepping forward and jerking his gun from his hand. 23. The sounds of shuffling feet and grunting nudged Danny from his dream. But that couldn't be true. He was still in a drugged fog. It had to be the slap on his face. But that couldn't be true either. Renee wouldn't slap him. Neither would the boy. Neither would Godfrey. The ghosts were groaning in the night. Renee was nowhere now. Vanished. Had someone slapped him? His eyes slowly opened, and for a moment he stared at the ceiling 3 feet above him, the surface a dingy gray in the dim light. The sound of his own breathing reminded him that he was still alive. One of Randall's blows had bruised his ribs. Why so quiet, Danny? Cool air drifted over his body. He'd fallen asleep in his blue slacks, shirtless. Danny closed his eyes and began to drift again. The fog settled and he turned his mind back to the vision of Renee. She was all that mattered now. Through his sacrifice, she had life. Because of him, she was free. If he lost her now, there would be no more reason to live. Why so still, Danny? It was a good question, spoken from the fog of his mind. So he opened his heavy eyes and thought about it. Why so quiet? Prisoners had no privacy. The snores and coughs and grunts of other inmates were never ending in the dead of night. But now the commons wing was perfectly silent. He blinked. Why? Danny listened, heart now throbbing with thickened blood. Not a sound. Beyond his own breathing. Maybe his ears weren't working properly because of the drug the warden had given him. Maybe he'd slept through the night and the others were gone to the yard. Maybe something was wrong. He pushed himself up onto one elbow and tried to clear his head. It was still night. The clock through the bars on the hall's far side read 10 past midnight. But the wing was lit beyond his cell, not dark as it normally would be after lockdown. His head felt like a steel ball as he turned it and glanced around the room. Gray. Undisturbed. Simon. The name chased emptiness around the room. Propped up on his elbow, Danny gripped the thin mattress with both hands and leaned over the edge. The still form in the lower bunk took shape in the darkness. Its eyes were not closed. It was not sleeping. It was not clothed. It was not breathing. It was not Godfrey. It was not alive. Danny reacted without thinking, hurling himself off the top bunk. If not for the drugs, he would have landed on his feet. Instead he hit the concrete floor with his hip and left shoulder. Pain spiked his bones and jerked him to full awareness. He rolled to his left, slammed into the lockers with a loud clatter, and sprang to a crouch, eyes locked on the bed. Peter stared at him, eyes wide, mouth parted like a dead fish. He was face down, with his cheek flat on the mattress and his knees pulled up under his torso, as if bowing in prayer. His left hand dangled over the bed. Pale, delicate fingers pointed at the floor. They'd cut him in a dozen places. They'd beat him to a pulp. They'd violated Him and placed him here to beg forgiveness in supplication. Danny staggered back, mind revolting. Godfrey. He jerked his head around. No sign of the old man. Danny pushed himself to his feet, shaking. Dear God, what had they done? Dear God, what had they done? Dear God, and then Danny knew what they had done, because the words scrawled in blood on the wall behind Peter's body made it plain. Welcome to hell, priest, I like girls too, God. This was Randall and Slane's doing, but he'd known that the moment he'd seen the naked body. His second thought was of Renee. In Danny's mind, the boy and Renee were suddenly one. They were the same, and it was because of him that in the bowels of this sanctuary, Marshall Pape's truth was a lie. His justice was revolting. An eye for an eye. Nausea swept through Danny's body. He stared back at Peter and let that familiar friend, rage, seep back into his bones. It swelled, then stormed, then shook his body. He was suddenly moving toward the door. His steps carried him with only one thought: justice. He reached his cell door and twisted the latch. Open. But of course it was open. This had all been planned. He stepped out onto the tier, turned, and quickly walked past vacant cells. There was no guard at the night station. There were no prisoners in their beds. The wing was empty except for Danny and the boy he'd failed to save. The warden had moved them all out so they couldn't see what happened next. Whatever that was, it could not be good, because there was no good in the warden's sanctuary. Images of the boy blinked through his mind. Peter and the girl who loved him. Walking hand in hand through the park, smiling, delighted by birds. His bright eyes and eager voice. Do you like chocolate, Danny? His fingernails dug into his palms, deeper with each breath. Oranges are grapefruit, Danny. Dear Renee, grapefruit. She would say. Before he could respond. It's better for you. I'll put some sugar on it. He hated grapefruit, but he would never tell her. He hated prison. He hated the warden. He hated Slane. He hated himself. He hated the whole world, because in the end it all came down to this. To a deviant on his knees, bloodied and bruised because he'd been a naughty boy. Danny spun around the rail at the stairs and took them down, one at a time. Feet bare. They were waiting. He knew that. He was doing what they wanted him to do. He knew that as well. The monster would make him a monster. He knew that more than anything else. So then, they would have their monster. None of them knew what he was capable of. None had stood by his side when. What the warden didn't know was that the slaughtered could also slaughter. That there was a time for peace and there was a time for war and there was a time to rip their heads from their skinny necks. The thoughts pummeled Danny as he entered the hub. In a single glance he saw that it was empty except for a lone CO, who stood at the door to the administration wing. The facilitator had his arms crossed, watching him without emotion. But in that moment he saw one other thing. This third shift guard was also a man. Not a facilitator or an officer or a machine or a monster, but a man. Dressed in a black uniform. In that moment it was the only thing that distinguished him from those in blue and tan. They all had families. They all had their favorite TV shows. They all had their enemies and their loved ones. This realization was the first to fracture his rage, but the effect vanished when he turned his head and saw that the door to the gymnasium was cracked open. Behind that door waited the warden. If not him, then his henchmen. If not them, then Randall and Slane. There was now only one path ahead of Danny, and it ended with Randall. The man would never again hurt another soul. The warden wanted Danny to kill Randall or Slane or both. In retrospect, the message had been clear from the outset. And now Danny would comply. He would put both men in their own personal, eternal grave. His feet patted on the concrete floor, the sole sound in the great room. He reached the door to the hard yard, took hold of the lever, and pulled it wide. 2 more steps, through the threshold, and he stopped. The lights were on, blazing bright. Over 100 prisoners lined the walls. All eyes on him, watching in dead silence. An armed guard stood in each corner, rifles in hand. The center of the room was cleared of all but stained concrete. Danny stood still, mind spinning, scanning the faces, most of whom he knew only by sight. He didn't know them and they knew him only as the stubborn priest. Now they would learn more about him. Much more. Some were dressed, some wore only shorts, as if they'd been awakened and herded here quickly. He saw Godfrey halfway down the right side, frail between two larger members. Danny quickly picked out Carney, then Tracy Banner and John Wilkins. He didn't immediately see Randall or Slane. No other prison could possibly produce such a moment. No other warden would allow, much less facilitate, a similar confrontation. A whistle sounded from the far corner, and Randall stepped out from behind the line of members to Danny's left. "You looking for me?" Randall walked toward him wearing a twisted grin. "You don't like what you saw." Danny moved forward, taking even, confident strides. The simple fact of the matter was that he could destroy the larger man. The world had seen too much evil from this devil. "You want to fight me, is that it, priest?" Slane stepped out from the opposite corner. "How about me, boy?" His hands were bloody. Danny stopped halfway across the hard yard, mind flashing back to that singular moment so many years ago in Bosnia when he hid behind a stove in his house and shot 3 killers. His life had come full circle. The victim was Peter now, but his mind was drawing no distinctions. "You killed the boy," Danny said, staring at Slane's body, his bloody hands and arms. "Oh, I did much more than that," the man said. 24. "We strapped the judge's arms and legs to a wood chair in his office with the duct tape from my kit." Heath pulled the shades and turned on the lamp that sat on a large cherrywood desk. Hunter green wallpaper with black pinstripes covered the wall and ran behind paintings and bookcases. The office, which apparently doubled as a law library, was trimmed with a rich mahogany wainscot and crown molding. Sicko's plans for us were clear. We were supposed to find out where the judge had his money and then kill him. Period. For 20 minutes, Heath paced in front of him, demanding answers to questions about drug money and Randall, with all the success of a man trying to wrestle answers from a brick wall. In regard to minor details, Heath had more success. We learned his name. Judge Franklin Thompson. We learned that he presided over the 2nd District Court of Appeals. That before being elected to the court, he'd practiced law for 15 years in the Bay Area. That he was divorced and had 1 son living in Boston. That he'd graduated from Yale Law School. That he'd smoked pot in college. That he had a boat in Marina del Rey, and that he was a narcissistic man who feasted on his own importance. We also learned that he was loaded with money. But I no longer cared about the money. I wasn't even sure Sicko's game had anything to do with money. What I did know was that the judge was my only outside link to Danny. I stood by the desk with my arms crossed and let the two of them hammer through their one-way interrogation, biting my tongue, eager to get onto Danny. How many times do I have to tell you? Even if I did know about Bruce Randall's conviction or incarceration, I'm bound by confidentiality, the judge was saying. Thompson's blotchy red face was sweaty, and his graying hair had fallen down over his forehead. You must believe me, I don't know. I did not preside over the case and I have no clue about any drug money. Or any other money connected to this man. This is absurd. Heath squatted down in front of the man and rested the barrel of his gun on the judge's lap. And how many times do I have to tell you that we don't have a choice here? Someone thinks you have their money. You either tell us where it is, or all 3 of us are dead. All of us. I know it is absurd. I also know that I don't want to die. So either you tell us where the money is, or it is over. It that really too difficult to understand. I don't have your $1 million. The man snarled. Heath's hand flashed out and slapped the judge's cheek. Wake up. Where's the money? Why do they want you dead? The room fell silent. Blood edged the corner of Thompson's mouth. I don't think you understand, the man said bitterly. I am in no way connected to any drug money, so I have no idea why the people behind this would want me dead. Even if I agreed to give you $1 million, I couldn't get to it until the banks opened, and it would take some time. You can't just muscle your way into a judge's home and demand $1 million. This isn't our plan. It's someone else's, and they aren't giving us options. Who? Thompson demanded. You tell me. I don't know. Think. Heath snapped. Forget the money for a minute and think about who would tell us to come to this house and put a gun to your head. You have that security system in place for a reason. Who would want you dead, for any reason? Thompson blinked. I have more enemies than I can count. But there has to be someone, a case that stands out. A sentence that kept you awake at night. Anything above and beyond. The man hesitated, then shook his head slowly. We do our best. Well, tonight your best is going to get you killed. And you'd spend the rest of your life in prison. As you said, I have security. It includes surveillance. Both of you are already on tape, off-site. If anything happens to me, the law's going to see that footage. That caught us both off guard. Heath glared at Thompson. The law's the least of our concerns. None of us will survive long enough. I lowered my arms. Heath, can I talk to you a minute? He faced me, flushed with frustration, then gave a shallow nod. We stepped outside the office and around the corner. The house was still dark except for the light from the office, and more spilling down the stairs from a wall lamp. He's lying, Heath said. Probably, but if he's got the money, we'll have to tear the house apart to find it or wait until the banks open tomorrow, like he said. I don't think this has anything to do with Randall's drug money. I don't like it. None of this makes sense. Heath waved. Would he send us here to kill a judge? That doesn't matter now. He's got us on tape. We're being played, Heath. You said it yourself. This is about Danny. A judge. Who has it out for Danny? He looked up at me. You think this guy's sicko? I glanced at the door and kept my voice low. No, but I mentioned Danny's name before you came in, and he recognized it. You're sure? I know a man's face. I want to find out what he knows about Basil and Danny. We're screwed now. I hope you realize that. He's got us on tape. We've been screwed for a week, I said. Forget about the money. We have to find out what he knows about Danny. I stared into his eyes, determined. I don't care what it takes. We need leverage, something to hold over his head. All right, we need leverage, but this is about Danny. And I want to do it my way now. Fine, your way. I want to talk to him alone. He wasn't expecting that. Alone. Why? Because I think I can talk to him as a woman. I don't see what. Sometimes a woman can do things to a man that a man can't. Just give me 10 minutes with him. Alone. With the door closed. He stared at me, unsure. I reached my hand out. Give me the gun. You can't use the gun. I need leverage. What do you think I'm going to use? My body. Give me the gun. You can't kill the man. I'm not going to kill him. We have nothing to lose. Gun. He hesitated, then handed it over. I don't like this. You don't have to. Just watch the front door. I entered the office and closed the door behind me. Locked it. I'd made a vow to never divulge any of Danny's crimes, which meant Keith couldn't know what I knew about the desk. I had no idea what he hoped to accomplish. His hands were taped to the chair's rear legs. It wasn't like he was going to reach some hidden weapon. I yanked a tapestry off the wall and wrestled it under the front legs of his chair. To keep the carpet clean. Then I grabbed a second wooden chair from its grouping around a small chess table in the corner, plopped it down in front of the judge, and sat facing him with my hands around the gun on my lap. For a few seconds I just stared at him, torn between grabbing his hair and knocking it against the desk until he told me what he knew, or taking a more crafty approach as I knew Danny would. Now you listen to me, Judge. I'm not a violent person, you have to know. That. I'm not like the murderers and rapists you send away for life. What I am is a woman. I need you to understand what that means. Do you know how it feels to be a woman? He looked at me with blank eyes. No, you don't. Then let me help you out. Most women give birth to babies. It's in their blood to protect those children at any cost. They can't help it. It's in their DNA. You can't convince them otherwise, because it is actually a part of themselves they're protecting. They'll give up their lives to save their children if they have to. Even you, if you had a son, you'd do anything to save him. Wouldn't you? It took him a moment, but he finally dipped his head. Yes, maybe even if that son had done something wrong, I said, thinking about that pedophile. The man's eyes held steady. Take that impulse you feel, and double it, I said. I don't have a son, but I still have that crazy mother DNA, and I have someone as precious to me as any child. I'll do anything to save him. If that kills me or puts me in prison for the rest of my life, so be it. Nothing's going to stop me. Which means you have a very serious problem in front of you. You have a desperate woman who will do anything, and I mean anything, to find out what you know about the man she would give her life for. His breathing was even. No denials, no confessions. Not yet. I lived in a nice house like this once, I said, glancing over his shoulder at the curtains. It had very thick walls. Like yours. And at least double pane glass. I don't think the neighbors will hear a gunshot, do you? Using a gun won't save anyone. His voice was firm. It's not things I can do with this gun. I stared at his knees, then at his crotch. I didn't know if Thompson was the father of the pedophile Danny had killed, but in my mind's eye he became that man. Danny had cut off his son's penis because he'd abused and killed a boy after being released from prison early, thanks to some fancy footwork by his father, the judge. My eyes lingered on his zipper, then I drew them up his chest. To his face. I think you know why I'm here, Mr. Thompson. I don't expect a confession. Frankly, I don't care what you've done in your past. It doesn't matter what you did to upset whoever sent us here. I really don't care what you do tomorrow or the day after that. But tonight you're going to tell me what you know, do you understand? I've told you what I know. Nothing. But you see, that's a lie. Nothing you say can change the fact that you've been fingered by someone who has a very elaborate plan that isn't sloppy or misinformed. There's nothing arbitrary about us being sent here. Nothing you say can change that. I may be small, but do I really look that stupid? Nothing. This is just between you and me now. To be honest, I'm not sure my friend has what it takes to blow off your penis. But you and I know about things like that, don't we? I don't know what you're talking about. You don't know about a certain son of yours who was convicted for pedophilia. I dropped the bomb and watched, and the twitch in the corner of his right eye closed the loop for me. That's what I thought, I said. The good news for you is, I don't care about that. Everybody's paid a price. What's done is done. Your secret's safe with me. All I need to know now is how you're connected to Basil. I don't know what you're talking about. He took 2 shallow breaths. I told you. I didn't hear the rest of it, because my true nature flexed its full will and darkened my mind. I stood up, took 1 step forward, bent over, put the barrel against his right brown loafer, and pulled the trigger. The shot crashed through the room and judged. It's okay, I snapped at Keith. I just shot off his toe. Open this door. he shouted. But I had no intention of opening the door. I'm not done, I said. I still have 8 bullets. 25. Then come here and do it to me. Danny's challenge hung in the hard yard, blasphemous and demanding a response. Someone cleared his throat. Otherwise there was no sound in the heart of that sanctuary. Randall stood 15 paces away, left of center. Slain, 15 paces right of center. The room was already turning in Danny's mind, transformed into a 3-dimensional model examined by a student of the fight. The distance to the walls, the positioning of the members, the sections of the concrete floor that were smooth or rough, the lights, the switches, the clothing his opponents wore, all of it. Like a gladiator armed only with his fists. Adrenaline had sufficiently cleared his mind. Who do you think you are? Randall asked. There was a note of sincerity in his voice. You think you're gonna change anything? Yeah, you think you're gonna change anything? Shut up. Slain, Randall snapped at his punk. The man's face flattened. The big man jabbed his chin at Danny. You think a priest like you has anything on a scum? I'm not the priest who abused you, Danny said. Randall stiffened. I'm the priest who found a boy abused by your punk. I'm the one who defends boys like you. Randall's face flushed red. Shut up. They don't know you were raped by a priest when you were a boy. I said shut up. Randall was moving already, marching forward with his thick hands balled into fists. Not so fast, Bruce. The warden's voice rang out from behind Danny. Randall wasn't stopping back. The order was that of a master commanding his dogs. This time, Randall pulled up, 8 paces away. Pape's hard-soled patent leather shoes clacked and grated on the concrete as he strolled out into the middle of the yard, one hand in his pocket. Danny let him come into view without removing his eyes from Slain or Randall. You think this is an unfair fight? The warden asked Randall. That you too can take him down. Then you don't know that our priest has made a life out of chewing up and spitting out people like you. When you were a little brat running around the neighborhood stealing old ladies' purses, Danny here was in the business of killing men twice his size. More men than you can count. He faced Danny, lips curved with a hint of a smile that reflected in his eyes. He was nothing less than delighted. It is unfair, he said. Isn't it, priest? Danny watched him. The words he'd spoken earlier were still cycling around his head like stray buzzards. Do it to me. But it wasn't just these two who hurt little Peter, Danny, the warden said. No, there were 3 more. He scanned the members who stood along the walls. Weren't there? Sure there were. Mason, Ratcliffe, Stone. Step out. 3 men broke from the ring of onlookers and approached the center of the yard. Danny recognized 2 of them, both heavily tattooed white knuckleheads who in any other prison might be scrutinized for gang affiliation. But none of their tattoos was familiar to Danny. Prison Inc. The third was a skinny man with a bald head and a viper's sneer. Of them all, he was likely the most dangerous. They moved into a circle around Danny. So then, it was now 5-on-1. You can take 'em, Danny, Carney said from the side. You'd like to join them, Brandon? The warden asked. No, sir. Then shut up. I will allow the priest to defend his honor and fight those who have so recklessly and gratuitously hurt Peter. The boy was abused, and however much that might disturb me, he was guilty of the same, so justice is served. As the book says, an eye for an eye. But death is a different matter. Just because God slays the wicked doesn't mean you may. Our aim is to rehabilitate, not kill, and one of these 5 men killed Peter. So now it only follows that the priest kills one of them. He was speaking to the whole room, but his eyes stayed on Danny. No one seemed to be aware that Pape was contradicting himself, speaking of rehabilitation and retribution in the same sentence. If he can. Danny stood at the epicenter of the grand stage, surrounded by opponents he Could not fear, did not fear. Not because they couldn't. If he extracted justice now, he would be lost, pulled back into an ideology that had once ruined him. Do it to me, he'd said to Slane. But if Danny struck back, to what end? More dead bodies for his graveyard. An image of Peter bowed in prayer pleaded with him. Danny's eyes rested on Slane, the one who'd surely enjoyed Peter's abuse the most. And there he saw a man. A hellion, a beast, but one with pretty blue eyes. What do you say, Danny? The warden said. Will you rise up to your calling? And there was Randall as well, belligerent, once abused by a priest. Now he would be killed by one. Danny felt the muscles in his shoulders begin to ease. He let his fingers relax. There was Brandon Carney, face stark with hope, eager to see Danny extract revenge. There stood tall Tracy Banner, with a scar on his cheek, watching with some wonder. Down the row, John Wilkins's lost expression begged for answers. Here stood the whole world. They all wanted to see justice. They all wanted him to spill blood. How much was enough? In my sanctuary, I am God, boy, the warden bit off. Danny looked at him, and saw that his face had gone flat. He knew. Vengeance is mine. When I say march, you march. When I say kill, you will kill. Or, my friend, I swear I will send you to that hole down there that they call hell. And this time your wailing will be heard for miles. No. Pape's eyes briefly narrowed. No, I was wrong. You're right, I could hurt these men. He glanced at Randall, who looked confused. I could snap Randall's neck before he landed one blow. Slane. I could break Slane over my knees like he deserves. That might be fair. But fairness has failed the world. The hard yard sat in perfect quiet. Why did you come? The warden's voice was tight. I came to kill Randall. Then you will kill him. I was wrong. And so you'll let them kill you. Danny took a deep breath, knowing already what he would do, what he must do. This wasn't just about him, it was about Renee. He, 26. 7 bullets left, I said, staring at the bloodied tapestry under the judge's chair. He was being stubborn, and I'd felt compelled to put a second bullet through his other foot, into the subfloor beneath the thick green carpet. They were hard jackets and passed through cleanly without making too much of a mess. But none of that lessened the judge's pain. Keith gave up trying to break the door down after the second shot, when I'd taken a moment to explain what I was doing. I sat in the chair, unable to steady my trembling hands. The nice thing about losing toes is that you can cover them up with good shoes. With good therapy, no one but you will even know someone shot them off. But I hear it is hard to walk if you lose too many, especially the big toes. He was sweating and his face was flushed. Tears of pain leaked down his cheeks. You're done, he growled through clenched teeth. Not really. Because if I still can't get you to talk, I'm going for the biggest toe. I gave his crotch a significant glance. I really don't want to do that, but I hope you understand now that I can't control myself. This is something I have to do. You can't get away with this. But you did, didn't you? You put your son back on the street, and he went back and killed that poor boy. You don't have to confess that. I just want to know how you're connected to Basil. That's all. Think about it. I'm not going to incriminate you. I'd go to prison if what I've done here ever came out. I'd have to spill all the beans and there'd be a full investigation into both of us. We're in the same boat, so we have to keep this all private. Me and my crazy DNA and you with your secret. Just tell me and we'll leave. I'm not going to kill you, even though that's what we were sent to do. I'm not a violent person. He was looking at me as if I was a complete nut, and that was fine by me. The crazier he thought I was, the better. I kept telling myself it was okay. That I had to do this, that I'd already gone too far to turn back, That this man did hold the key to Danny's life, that in some ways Danny was in prison because this man had pushed Danny beyond the brink when he'd cut his son loose. But I didn't really know if any of that was true, and I was feeling nauseated. The judge sat in his chair, chest rising and falling as he tried to control his agony. So I have to use another bullet? I asked. This is absurd. The last word was a snarl. Is that a yes or a no? He only glared at me. So I stood up, leaned over, and pressed the gun to the tip of his right shoe. I was just starting to squeeze the trigger when he spit in my hair. Dirty, germy spit. My crazed DNA reasserted itself. I jerked the gun up and shoved it into his crotch. You shouldn't have done that, I said. I know what your son did. You think Danny killed him and now you're after Danny. Tell me what you know about Basil or I'm going to pull this trigger. He swore. You don't think I'll do it? Like son. Like father. His jowls were 27. Kill him. The warden's order echoed through the hard yard. The first to come wasn't Randall. The big man had heard something that made him hesitate. The first was one of the heavily tattooed men behind Danny, and he came like a bull, rushing at full speed as if this were a street fight and he could simply overwhelm Danny by force. Without turning, Danny waited, using the sound of the man's feet slapping on the concrete to judge his distance. The other tattooed member joined the rush, to the right and slightly behind the first man. By not turning, Danny offered his attacker the false perception that victory was imminent, that if he only moved faster and reached Danny before he could turn, he would be able to break his back from behind. This belief drew the man into a final headlong rush. Slane was now on the move as well. That made 3 coming in, no contact. Danny spun to his right when the tattooed man was only 1 step away. Hooked his arm behind the man's back, and shoved hard. The off-balance attacker flew forward and collided head-on with Slane. A bone snapped. They both crashed to the ground with Slane beneath, screaming in pain. But now the other tattooed man arrived, swinging his fist at Danny's head like a club. Danny shifted and blocked the blow down and away with his forearm. In any other circumstance he would have caught the arm and wrenched it back for either a break or a dislocation. As it was, he helped the man find the ground with a kick at his ankles and quick shove at his back. Arm deflected and twisting, the man landed on his shoulder with a grunt. Slane was moaning. He'd been struck with a head to his arm, now broken. The first attacker was back on his feet, facing him like an ape. But Danny had disrupted their circle and he now backed away from the 3 standing men, hands lifted in partial surrender. I don't want to fight, but I'll defend myself. Please, this isn't necessary. Fight. The warden roared. All but Slane found their feet and came together, screaming bloody murder. 4 grown men unfamiliar with tactics any more strategic than brawling with fists or backstabbing with shanks. Without a dark corner from which to spring, without an element of surprise, with only their fists and muscles, they were at a hopeless disadvantage. They came fast, sure that 4 abreast could overwhelm 1 man. But all 4 had 2 legs, and all 8 of those legs were propelling them forward. Danny feinted back 1 step into a half-crouch, but instead of retreating he surged toward them and threw himself down, perpendicular to their path. He hit the ground at their feet and crashed through them. The 2 on the ends had time to jump, but still he caught one of them by the foot. The 2 in the center, Randall and one of the tattooed men, took the full weight of Danny's body on their ankles. Their forward momentum carried their bodies where their feet could not go. Another bone snapped. 3 of the men sprawled headlong onto the concrete. 2 rolled and came up, panting. The tattooed man lay on the floor near Slane, twisting with the pain of a broken ankle. Danny had missed the skinny one entirely, and now the man twisted back to take a vicious kick at Danny's head. There was no way to avoid the contact. Danny arched his back and took a glancing blow on his temple. The man left his legs exposed, and Danny could have struck the side of his knee, perhaps disabling him with one kick. But doing so stood a good chance of putting the man out of commission for more than a single fight. Instead, he rolled away and came up in time to deflect a second blow aimed at his head. This time he took the man's feet out from under him. The skinny, bald man landed on an unpadded seat. Hard. Danny backpedaled on light feet, hands up. You don't need to do this. You must understand, I won't fight, but I must defend myself. Please, you call that not fighting? Slane blurted from the ground. You're alive, aren't you? The warden wore a mild grin, whether truly impressed or shocked and attempting to cover it, Danny didn't know. You've made your point, Danny said. Have I? The warden held up his hand toward Randall, who was circling in. Eyes crazed. No, I don't think I have. The point is, we accept only deviants in this place. Bring your broken and wounded and I will make them whole. Isn't that the way it works? I will rehabilitate you. But broken you are. I am broken, Danny shouted. Then kill him. The warden jabbed his finger at Slane. Kill the man who broke my rules and killed young Peter. An eye for an eye. Take his life. I can't. Pape stopped, stared at Danny for a moment. Captain. Boastich took one step away from the wall. Yes, sir. Kill Slane. A beat of silence. Shoot him, sir. He broke a fundamental rule and killed a man, did he not? Yes, sir. Then do the same to him. Yes, sir. Boastich lifted his rifle, aimed at Slane, who was just beginning to grasp what was happening, and shot him through the head before the first cry of protest could be heard. The loud crash of gunfire echoed through the room. Slane dropped flat, hole in head. Now, the warden said, addressing Danny. 28. Tell me, or I swear I'm pulling this trigger, I snapped. The judge was trembling from head to bloody feet, furious that I'd maneuvered him into bearing his deepest secret. But he still wasn't telling me. I swear I received a call from Basil this morning, he breathed. That's not enough. We'll start over. 3, 2, the warden called me an hour ago. He was breathing hard. He said there'd been an accidental death. A rape that went too far. A rape. You know the warden. Why would he call you? Who was raped? I was instrumental in transferring a young man convicted of statutory rape to his prison. The boy was evidently raped. What about Danny? He held his silence and I knew that this was the information that had him resisting all along. He could have told me about the boy earlier, but it was something about Danny that he wanted to keep from me. What was the name of your son? The muscles along his jawline bulged. I pressed the gun in tighter. Tell me. Roman, he said. He was a pedophile. Yes. Now move the gun. So I really had been right. I stood back and lowered the gun to my side, still trying to connect the dots. Franklin Thompson had made the one confession he never imagined making, but I needed more. Danny had killed the judge's son, and for that maybe I was sorry. But that was the past. What does the boy's rape have to do with Danny? The warden said there could be some trouble, and he wanted legal advice. If any of this comes out, you know I'll deny it. Tell me what I need to know and it won't. Trouble with who? With Danny. The man's eyes shifted. He told me that the inmate behind the rape wants to kill Danny, and that he's inclined to allow it. That's all I know. What do you mean kill Danny? Waves of heat washed over my face. Who's going to kill Danny? That's all I know. I sent the boy there because the warden said he needed him to break Danny. I didn't know he would be killed. Danny murdered my son. If you could prove that, you'd have gone through legal channels. But my mind was on Basil. Randall was going to kill Danny, and the warden was in on it. You have to help me stop it, I said. I can't. What do you mean, you can't? You set this up. You have to. I didn't set it up. I only got him the boy. Call the warden and tell him I know everything. I can't. And you don't. Why can't you? The warden knows too much. He would turn on me. My life would be over. I don't care if your life would be over. You set Danny up. You get him out. Keith banged on the door. Renee, hold on. Blind with rage, I walked back up to the judge and put the gun against his teeth. Now you listen to me, Judge. I really have lost it. You hear me? I'm a neurotic, manic mess. I don't care anymore if I live or die. You're going to call that warden and you're going to get Danny out of there, or I swear I'm going to blow off another body part. You don't understand. The warden would start cleaning up his mess the moment I called him. They'd all be dead. Danny, the boy, Randall, all of them. There'd be no witnesses. And then he'd come after me. My mind was in a dark fog, and all I could see was Danny, the gentle giant, who'd taken a vow of nonviolence, turning the other cheek as the warden beat him to a bloody, dead mess. But somewhere in that fog I knew that the judge was right. The machine that had growled to life couldn't be stopped with a phone call. Or by the law. Not 29. Danny took a step back at the order. Kill Randall. Slane's body lay face down in a pool of his own blood. The man with the broken ankle was dragging himself away from the body. Randall's face twisted into a pitted ball of rage. Danny took another step back. Kill him, or I'll kill you and she'll be all alone out there, twisting in the wind. Renee panic lapped at Danny's mind. He could not kill Randall. He could. Yes, he could, but in doing so he would become only another monster, and a monster could not love Renee. Randall took the matter out of Danny's hands, no doubt certain that if he didn't kill Danny, Bostich would shoot him too. He roared and rushed. Danny's first instinct was to take the man down. Doing so would have been a simple matter. But Randall was built like an oak and wouldn't fall for a simple disabling maneuver again. Danny would have to use force. A lot of it. His mind scrabbled, grasping for a way out of the warden's impossible game. All he could think of was a fist to the man's throat. But no, he would crush Randall's windpipe. His opponent came in like a bull, fists up like hammers, and Danny skipped backward on the balls of his feet. Don't do it, Bruce, he breathed. It's no good. Fight. The warden shouted. Kill him. Kill him, Danny. Carney shouted. Other prisoners joined in, their mutters and jeers encouraged by the warden's own order. Randall was the enemy to most of them. They all wanted to see his blood on the ground. They, too, wanted justice. Kill him, Danny. Pape shouted over the din. Rip his head off. This was their Colosseum and Danny was their gladiator. But he would not kill Randall. There was only one way. Danny ducked out of Randall's reach and stopped 10 feet from the warden. Eyes on the raging bull. He held out one hand. Hold on. Randall came on, but he slowed. Just hold on. Danny snapped. The man was panting, blinking the sweat from his eyes. Desperate to survive, Danny lowered his guard. He started for the larger man, arms at his sides. Let's at least make this fair, he said. Now only 4 paces from Randall. I can't in good conscience simply kill you. You first. Hit me. 2 paces. Hit me with everything you have, you dumb oaf. Randall closed the last step, drew his fist back and threw his full weight into a full swing at Danny's head. He let the blow come, knowing that he was flirting with death. But he saw no other way. The man's fist landed on his temple. Snap. 30. I faced the judge and all I could think was that I had to save Danny. Danny had saved me and now I had to save him. The judge was complicit in a plan to destroy him, and I alone knew the full truth. As I saw it, there was only one way to save him. I hurried to the door, turned the handle, and jerked it open. Keith spun from where he was pacing in the shadows. I gave the door a shove and let it slam behind me. We have to break into Basil. He stared at me. What happened? I'm done with this game. I'm going in there and I'm going to kill Randall. You think that'll stop Sicko? What happened in there? He's going to kill Danny. That's what happened. The judge told you that. The warden's in on it. They're in that institution, free to do whatever they want, and right now what they want is to break Danny. I'm going after him. Hold on. Slow down. Keith walked to the office door, cracked it wide, enough to glance inside and, satisfied that the judge was as he was supposed to be, notwithstanding bloody feet, he shut it and faced me. From the top. Before any more crazy talk about breaking into Basil, I need to know what just happened in there. What did he say? I shot off 2 of his toes. I saw. He told me that he came to some kind of agreement with the warden to send a boy to Basil so the warden could break Danny. But it has all gone wrong and now Randall's going to kill Danny. Keith dropped his eyes to the floor. He knows we didn't follow his instructions. The boy at the warehouse. We didn't cut off his finger. He's following through. Either way, we have to get in, I said. And the judge can't know. All it would take is one call from the judge to warn the warden. I couldn't say anything about the judge's son. Danny's first victim. We have to go, Keith. It's our only play. Slow down. They brought Danny to Basil to break him, but I know Danny. He doesn't break easily. They'll kill him instead. He hesitated, then nodded. You're forgetting about Sicko. Unless you think the judge is Sicko. No, that didn't make sense, did it? Sicko wants the judge dead, I said. So who's pulling the strings? The warden. Maybe. He paced, running his hands through his hair. Why would the warden have a grudge against Danny? I can understand trying to break him on the inside, but why go through all this trouble with us? Because he knows how much Danny loves me. And if Danny knows what's happening to me, he'd lose it, I thought, but a knot in my throat cut off my voice. I don't know. The warden wouldn't risk all this craziness to break a man. He glanced back at the door. That leaves the judge. But that doesn't make sense either. Why would he want us to kill him? And why would he make us jump through all of these hoops? In a perfect world, we'd have the answers we needed before we did anything crazy, like break into Basil. But we didn't have time to unravel the mess. I had to get to Danny. That was all I cared about now. It doesn't matter. We have to get in there before it is too late. It always matters. We get inside the prison and stop Randall. That's what matters. The answers are there. All of them, there, not here. He didn't object as quickly this time. Assuming we could get in and stop Randall, the warden would just find another way to break Danny, he said. Then we stop the warden. We blow the whole thing sky high. How? I don't know how, I snapped. I took a deep breath and tried to gather myself. You tell me how. Prisons are built to keep people in, not keep them out. Don't tell me there's no way. We either get in there and stop this or, like you told the judge, we're all finished. Money. We'd have to do it within the next 2 days. I'd won him over, which could be either good or bad, but in that moment all I could think about was Danny, and Danny was in trouble now, not in 2 days. We can't wait that long. You can't just drive up there and walk in. We'd have to get the right identification, make the arrangements, and plan it down to the minute. And then there's the getting out part. So you know how we can get in. He averted his eyes. Maybe. I've been thinking. I made a few calls. And you didn't tell me. You would have insisted. We didn't know enough to go off half-cocked. We still don't. I do. I walked over to my kit open on the floor and shoved the gun into the bag. Everything leads back to Basil. Everything. I snapped the kit shut and snatched it off the floor. We're wasting our time here. What about the judge? We tell him he has 2 days to gather $1 million. We'll be back in 48 hours. And what if he goes to the police? Or warns the warden? He won't, I said. I know too much about him now. If he can't keep quiet, what I know about him goes to the press. 31. He didn't know how long he'd been out, only that he wasn't dead. And that he'd been brought back to consciousness by water thrown on his face. Wake up, you idiot. Payback time. The captain's voice. Danny opened his eyes. The concrete ceiling of the terrible room where he'd spent 2 days slowly came into focus. He was in deep meditation. The place of torment. But he was alive, which could only mean that the warden had stopped Randall from killing him as he lay unconscious in the hard yard. This was what Danny had hoped for. Death wasn't Pape's objective. His world revolved around compliance and punishment. But what of Randall? Danny turned his throbbing head and saw that he wasn't on the ground. Or on the wall. He lay on his back, arms and legs strapped to the wooden table, dressed only in loose shorts. Book.2 stood over him wearing a slash for a grin. Sweat beaded his forehead, and darkened the armpits of his uniform. Wakey, wakey. A doctor from the infirmary stood in the corner, dressed in a white smock. There was a black medical bag at his feet. The man was tall and gaunt, with high cheekbones and a balding blonde head. He watched Danny, emotionless, hands clasped in front of his waist. The door opened, and the warden stepped into the room like a sloth, slow and deliberate. He closed the door behind him and straightened his black suit jacket. Danny saw then that they'd strapped down his shins and thighs as well as his ankles. The low-wattage incandescent bulb on the ceiling flickered once, then remained lit, casting its glow about the room. Marshal Pape slid one hand into his pocket as he always did, and stepped into the middle of the room. There wasn't a hint of kindness on his face. You disappoint me, Danny. You saw what they did to that poor boy. Slane was the kind of person other prisons keep paroling back into society to prey on the weak. The kind who took my but Danny's mind was more on the straps holding his legs. Why? A tinge of fear leaked through his bones. The warden nodded at the doctor, who bent for his black bag. Did your father ever send you into quiet time when you were a child? Danny. He cleared his throat. Yes. Think of the whole as a kind of quiet time. But if you keep breaking the rules, things get worse. The next time, your father might take away privileges. Then swat your hand. Then maybe give you a good whipping. No, but Danny said nothing. You may think of this as your good whipping. I hope it is your last. He stepped aside as the doctor placed his black bag on the table. From it he withdrew a white cloth, which he placed next to Danny, then latex gloves, and something that looked like a silver electric toothbrush without the brush. A small jar of disinfectant and several cotton swabs were next. The warden continued in a calm voice. Don't worry, he's very clean. It's important that you don't develop an infection. The doctor removed a small white case, which he opened. From it, he selected a very thin 6-inch needle that went into the end of the device. Or was it a small drill bit, like those used by dentists? Sweat began to seep out of Danny's pores. The doctor connected a small air tube to the silver wand and set it down on the white cloth. Taking the disinfectant, he wiped a 4-inch section of Danny's shin. No one spoke now. Book.2 stood with his arms crossed, wearing a smirk. The warden watched, hand in pocket, frowning. The doctor calmly went about his business. The advantage of this particular form of punishment is that it will leave only a very small mark, Pape said. The needle will reach into your bone and grind at certain nerves. There will be no permanent damage, but you can expect the pain to be quite intense. It doesn't compare to eternal fire, but you'll get the general idea. The doctor felt along Danny's shin bone with his thumb until he found what. Some people just can't be rehabilitated in their time. As for Peter's suffering, it was short. Yours will last 2 days. We'll talk then. He stepped away. The door squealed open, then closed behind him. Bostich pressed a thick strip of rubber against Danny's mouth. Bite on this. You don't want to chew off your tongue. He accepted the piece, bit into it, and marshaled all of his focus to one end, shutting down his mind. The brain controlled pain. The nerve endings might be stimulated, but unless their message was properly interpreted by the mind, the pain would be lost. There was no way to avoid the warden's punishment, but he could endure it by minimizing that pain. This Danny knew, but he had never felt a thin, whining drill grind into his bones before. The device screeched to life. Try not to move, the doctor said. We have a long way to go and I don't want to tear up your bone marrow. It was with that word marrow that Danny's resolve began to fade. The tip of the drill touched his skin and a sharp sting shot up his leg. But not so much that he flinched. Then it struck his chin and the sensation swelled, a biting, excruciating pain that brought with it spreading heat as his flesh rebelled. This too, Danny could manage for some time. He bit down on the rubber with more force and pushed his thoughts into submission, searching for the solace that he'd learned to find beyond them. But then the drill broke past the surface of the bone and struck a tangle of nerves that shattered any notion he could endure such torment. The pain was not localized. It slammed into his whole body at once, like a thundering wave crashing onto the shore. Nothing could have prepared him for such intense agony. His body began to tremble from head to foot. His head snapped back, and he clamped down. 32. Wednesday. I was a bundle of raw nerves. Heath drove the rented black Ford sedan down Highway 138 toward Lone Pine Canyon Road toward Basil. He had pulled the entire plan together in fewer than 40 hours and, despite the fact that it fell into place so seamlessly, I was certain we'd forgotten something. We had identification. Getting in would all come down to our office of the Inspector General ID badges. Never mind that. Even if we hadn't forgotten anything and getting into the prison proved to be as simple as we thought it could be, we were entering the lion's den. The warden was in there. Randell was in there. We were dressed like congressmen visiting our constituents, Heath in a dark blue suit and me in blue slacks and a white blouse. I'd watched a documentary once about the cult leader Jim Jones, who set up a compound for his followers in Guyana called Jonestown. A congressman who had gone in to investigate rumors of abuse lost his life along with more than 900 temple followers. I couldn't shake the feeling that Basil was our Jonestown and I was that congressman. We'd left Judge Thompson in his estate, assured of his silence and compliance. Knowing that he was complicit at some level, we told him what we wanted him to hear. Someone wanted him dead, and unless he got our hands on $1 million within 48 hours, we would have to at least fake his death. We would be back. There would be no contact until then, because we believed that someone was watching. As to why Sicko wanted the judge dead, the reasoning had become obvious to us. Thompson was a loose end who knew too much to be left alive. If we killed him, we would be implicated in his murder and go to prison, which was one of Sicko's stated objectives from the beginning. It was the perfect setup. As to why Sicko had led me to the Dancing Bear, then to the warehouse with the maimed boy before leading us to the judge, the answer seemed obvious in retrospect. He was manipulating me, pushing me further and further, hoping I would snap and kill a man with my own hands. But now we'd turned the tables on him. He didn't know it yet, but he was now playing our game, and in that game I needed the judge alive. In fact, he was invaluable. Assuming both Danny and I survived the next 24 hours. You're sure these ids will work? I asked. Heath didn't bother answering. He drove the sedan in silence, as he had for most of the drive north. Neither of us had slept more than a few hours since Sunday night. He'd dyed his hair black and wore a mustache and goatee. He looked nothing like the Keith I knew. I'd found a short blonde wig and wore rectangular, wireframe glasses. True, I was still my skinny self, but Keith seemed certain that the warden wouldn't detect us. Although he had probably seen pictures of us, he hadn't met either of us in person, a key factor in recognition. Our alterations were simple, but they would be effective, and I had to trust him on that. How long? I asked. 5 minutes. Honestly, most of my nervousness revolved around the thought of seeing Danny again. Would I? What condition was he in? Was he even alive? I stared at the road ahead and tried to imagine seeing him again. Would he recognize me with a wig on? What would I say? I'd written a letter that laid it all out. Everything that had happened. Everything we planned. Although the judge didn't know it yet, with his help I was going to get Danny transferred out of Basel. But first we had to keep him alive. We had to stop Randall. We had to deal with the warden. That couldn't be done from the outside because there was too much risk of the warden being tipped off, which would send him sky high. He'd blow up the whole prison with Danny in it. He'd become the new Jim Jones, and Basel would become his Jonestown. The letter was folded neatly in my underwear. Nothing was as important as getting it to Danny. Keith gave me a quick glance, then returned his gaze to the road. What are you thinking? I asked. He waited a while before answering. I was thinking that I've been over this 100 times, and I'm still having a hard time believing the system would leave such a gap in their security. They must have retina scans, fingerprints, something to identify OIG deputies besides a simple ID. I gave him our pat answer. Who wants to break into prison, right? Yeah, but you trust your source, I said, knowing the answer. He nodded absently. Sources. 3 of them. Our break-in would be made possible because of the separation of power between the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and the Governor's Office of the Inspector General, the investigative watchdog that had reporting authority over the way the CDCR ran the prisons. In essence, the OIG could investigate any complaints of abuse in the Department of Corrections. Misappropriation of funds, theft, any form of misconduct in the prison system was the OIG's to flush out. OIG deputies routinely showed up unannounced to audit, inspect, or investigate complaints. According to California law, any prison official's refusal to cooperate constituted a misdemeanor. The OIG was seen by some as the governor's Gestapo arm, the adversary, the ones who made the difficult task of controlling prison populations even harder. But that adversarial relationship gave OIG deputies healthy respect, and we intended on tapping it. We needed only an hour inside, plenty of time to do what we needed to do and get out before any collateral damage was discovered. There were problems, challenges that would have been impossibilities without Keith's connections, like getting fake ID badges made quickly. And any investigation into a prison like Basel would immediately put the warden on high alert. He would watch us like a hawk. After numerous phone calls and hours of digging, the plan that Keith landed on seemed flawless. We would show up unannounced as 2 deputies dispatched from the main office in Sacramento. The warden would be familiar with regional deputies. Our papers identified us as deputies Miles Somerset and Julia Wishart. We were investigating a current well-known problem in the system: spiked milk supplied by the Prison Industry Authority. We would take random blood and urine samples from inmates, and milk samples from the kitchen. It would take only an hour and we'd be out of their hair. The warden wouldn't call the Sacramento office to verify our task, because doing so would cast suspicion on his motives for inserting himself into the investigation. You don't call headquarters and demand to know why the Gestapo are checking out your prison unless you're covering something up. He might be able to make inquiries through back channels, but it would take time. Hopefully enough for us to get in and out. Once we were processed and inside, we had the authority to ask the staff to help us or stay clear. We would find Randall and simple. But we both knew nothing was ever that simple. Heath took the turn onto the winding canyon road, and the silence seemed to deepen, despite the fact that neither of us was talking. The radio was off, the windows were up, the air was turned down. My gut felt inside out. Remember, he said softly. It's all in the way we play it. It's in the eyes and the voice. Who are you? Julia Wishart. OIG. You don't need to worry, I can handle myself. I know you can. So does the judge now. Maybe I should shoot off Randall's toes. Maybe not. We both grinned, but our attempt at humor fell flat. We stick to our agreement, Keith said. We go in, confront Randall, tell him. If he touches Danny, he'll spend the rest of his life in a far worse place. Learn what we can about Sicko from him. Warn Danny, then get out. If everything falls apart, we call the authorities using the number on speed dial. I'd rather be at the mercy of law enforcement than of the warden. If neither of us can make a call and we can't get out, he blew out some air. Let's just hope it doesn't come down to that. You're sure they won't search us? They could by law, but they won't. I've checked. Once they process us, we can come and go as we please. Just remember that and wear it on your face, not just on your badge. Like I said, I can handle myself. I wasn't exactly new to this. I knew I could flip a switch if I had to. You do what you have to do when the world is at stake, and Danny was my world. We passed the bluff where I'd stood and looked down at Basil just over a week earlier. Heath guided the car around a curve, and the prison's first checkpoint came into view. A brick guardhouse with a gate. 2 officers stood inside behind the large glass window. Here we go, Heath said. Let me do the talking. He slowed the car and came to a stop next to the reinforced glass. I immediately recognized one of the men in the guardhouse. It was the blonde man I'd talked to on my first visit. My first thought was that it was over. He'd recognize me. He knew I wasn't with the OIG. But I wasn't the same woman he'd met, was I? I was Julia Wishart, OIG. Heath beamed at the man. Afternoon, gentlemen. He casually stuck out his ID. Miles Somerset, OIG. We need access to the facility for an inspection, if that's not. The man stared at Keith, then at his ID, then looked at me. For a moment I wasn't sure how to take his stare. He'd been confident, casual, completely in command when I'd met him before. Now he seemed off guard, and I wasn't sure if it was because he sensed something wrong or because a visit from the Inspector General naturally set most prison staff on edge. OIG, he said. What's the nature of your visit? Well now, that would take all the fun out of it, wouldn't it? The officer stared at him. We all knew that OIG had no obligation to explain itself. Heath let the question stand for a second, then grinned. We're doing routine inspections tied to an investigation of the prison industry authority. You can understand my reluctance to give any opportunity to suppress evidence. It's a supply side issue. We'll be in and out in an hour. The guard's eyes met mine again. Identification. I reached across Keith and handed him my ID. Afternoon, officer. Deputy. Julia Wishart. I could think of nothing else to say, so I just said, shouldn't take long. The man took my badge and dipped his head. Just 1 second. He retreated into the booth, spoke to the other staff member, then lifted a phone off the wall and made a call. He's checking, I whispered. Heath didn't respond. He didn't even look at me, which was message enough. Shut up. The guard spoke into the phone, tapped quickly at a keyboard, then hung up. The receiver. Our names would come up on a list of registered OIG deputies because our counterparts actually existed, far away in Sacramento, probably pushing paper. Keith had done his homework. An elderly man with round spectacles somewhere in Culver City knew he'd forged 2 OIG IDs for the fair price of $5,000, but any admission on his part would land him in prison. We were covered. Again, I only half believed it. The guard leaned back out of the booth and handed Keith the IDs. Long way from Sacramento. Tell me about it, Keith said. They're running this one out of the main office. He nodded. Head on down. The value of a good forgery, Keith said. Just like that. Not quite. But it was just like that. I knew it was too easy. I should have known then that something was terribly wrong. I kept telling myself that it would work, that everything was going to be all right, that the demons screaming inside of me were just a part of my neurosis. I kept thinking that although getting in was the easiest part, God was on our side, because we'd come to set the world straight and sometimes the good side does win. But then suddenly it wasn't just like that, because we came around a corner. And the massive structure called Basil loomed before us. I sat next to Keith, numbed by our audacity in the face of that fortress. It had all seemed so doable on paper, but driving up to the prison I was suddenly certain that I wouldn't come out alive. If I did, it would be in Danny's shackles because he would no longer need them. He'd be dead. Then again, maybe it really was just like that, because we were breaking in. Not breaking out, and getting into prison was very easy in the United States of America. You can check in anytime you like, but you can never leave. The first gate at the perimeter fence rolled open as we approached. I sat still, and tried to keep my mind on Danny as we rolled into the Sally Port. This is it, I heard Keith say. Just like that, I returned. Not quite, he repeated. But it was. A deputy welcomed us, asked us to leave the rental car where it was, and then led us, briefcases in hand, along the fences to steps leading up to the arching front entrance. The massive bolts on the iron doors were drawn back. Some would say that Basil looked stately compared to other prisons, but all I saw was a glorified dungeon. I tried to imagine Danny locked away inside such a beautiful building, but I couldn't in my mind return to flip-flopping between just like that and impossible. Something was wrong. No, nothing's wrong, Renee. My palms were sweating, but everything was going exactly as we'd planned it. We were breaking into Basil to save Danny. We were ushered into a reception area that reminded me of a waiting room at a doctor's office. I stood by the window, looking calm and collected with both hands clasping my briefcase as Keith gave our badges and paperwork to the staff. I was thinking that I should do something besides stand there like a coat rack. But Keith was in charge of getting us in. The CO who'd ushered us in stood by the door patiently, watching me. I gave him a shallow smile and a nod, then averted my eyes. Did he suspect anything at all? Evidently he didn't, because he just stood there for the 5 minutes it took the clerk to process us and call for our escort. A staff member dressed in a white shirt and blue tie walked into the room and smiled. Welcome to Basil, deputies. He reached out his hand. Michael Banning, assistant to the warden, at your service. I understand you'd like to inspect our milk. Keith took his hand. Just a random inspection, no cause for alarm. We'd like to get started if that's all right with you. We have another appointment today. Of course. He offered me his hand and I didn't want to take it, but I did. I'm guessing you're Julia. Deputy is fine, I said. He grinned wide. Well then, deputy it is. The warden is on his way down. Can I get either of you anything? Coffee, a soda. This isn't a social call, Mr. Banning, Keith said. The warden will be notified of our findings when our investigation is complete. Now if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to get started. Of course. But I'm sure the warden would feel he'd insulted you if he didn't greet you himself. It'll just be a minute. I don't know what came over me at that moment. Maybe my fear of meeting the warden, Maybe my aversion to waiting one more minute for anything when it came to Danny. But I looked into his eyes and spoke with simple authority. Do you know how much evidence can be burned in a minute, Banning? Banning. Not Mr. Banning. Or Michael, just Banning. He flashed another grin. Of course. It'll just be a moment. Before I could make another pass at setting him straight, the door crashed open and a tall man wearing round glasses and a black suit walked in. Who do we have the pleasure of assisting today? He boomed. This was Marshall Pape, warden of the Basil Institute. My partner was just explaining to your assistant, we have another appointment, so if you could help us keep this as simple as possible, we'd be grateful. I considered stopping there but kept going. Nothing to worry about. We just need to take some random samples of milk and question some of the inmates about spiking. I'm sure you've heard of the recent issues with the Prison Industry Authority. Point us in the right direction so we can get out of your hair. Keith watched me, masking his surprise at my monologue, I'm sure. The warden looked down at me with a kind face, if a bit long in the nose. I wasn't sure if his smile was forced or if he truly found me amusing. Right to the point. I like that. He slid one hand into his pocket. It is a nice place, isn't it? We take a lot of pride in what we do here. You have my full cooperation. No one is more eager to root out any irregularity or misconduct, I can assure you. His eyes turned to Keith. You're not from this region. I know most of the deputies. We're out of the main office. Thank you for your help, Warden. We'd like to get started. Of course. Michael will take you to our conference room and call up any staff or members you wish to interview. Samples of the milk can be taken from the kitchen. The conference room won't work, I said. We'd like to question the inmates in their cells. It's less formal and more direct. We'll need a roster. His grin faltered. Of course. You didn't bring your own records. Policy requires we use the most recent, which would be yours, Keith said. Yes, of course. A moment of silence hung over the room. Well then, Michael will be glad to take you wherever you wish to go. My prison is yours. Thank you, I said. But we won't be needing an escort. I looked at the assistant. Get us a roster and show us around. We'll take it from there. Another beat of silence. The warden dipped his head. Michael, you heard the deputy. He started to turn, then faced me again. Please be careful. 33. Danny had endured punishment and he'd suffered pain, but he'd never been taken to the edge of himself as he had over the last 36 hours. There was no escaping that cell. No refuge from the excruciating pain, no reprieve from the warden's place of punishment. If he'd been weaker, he might have passed out, but he could not, and he now regretted his strength. His body seemed to react without his will engaged. He'd never screamed as he had on that table. His muscles had never locked up so fiercely or shaken so violently without soon submitting to his control. But there in deep meditation his physical torment was beyond him entirely, and his body could only revolt in the most strenuous terms. All of his attempts to muscle his mind into a calm, meditative state failed to attain the peace he sought for more than a few minutes. There in the darkness behind closed eyes, he searched for and found light, but it was fleeting, stamped out by raging pain. He refused to surrender to the pain. Neither could he surrender his mind. But all of his attempts to step beyond it failed him far more than they aided him. Unending misery was his only friend in that place of torment. If they hadn't cinched the leg straps so tightly, he might have shaken loose from the restraints. The only reason the bit didn't break off in his bone was because it was flexible, like a very thin cable. The doctor had taken many breaks, one that lasted nearly 6 hours. Presumably to sleep. But as Danny quickly learned, the breaks only intensified the experience. After 30 minutes of grinding he found that his body began to shut down his nerves of its own accord. The doctor would withdraw the needle from his shin, calmly lay the device on the table, and sit for a smoke or leave the room for 10 minutes before resuming his task with the calculation of a brain surgeon. Initially, Danny had found the break welcome, but the first time the bit returned to the tiny hole in his shin and made contact with his inflamed nerves, he understood their intentions. The pain was even more intense than before and only seemed to increase each time the doctor repeated the cycle. His anticipation of that pain was its own kind of torture. Bostich had left them after the first hour and checked in on several occasions, each time muttering words that Danny could hardly hear, much less digest in his condition. The ordeal jerked his mind back to the pain he'd inflicted on his victims before taking his vow of nonviolence. He'd never tortured anyone. He didn't have a sadistic bone in his body, but he had used painful force. It was true that each of those he'd confronted were guilty of heinous crimes, but while lying on the table in convulsing agony he wished no pain on the guilty, because he knew his own guilt. Weren't all guilty. He lost track of time. His life descended into cycles of suffering marked by the doctor's insertion of the bit into one of several holes he'd made in Danny's shin. There was no end. There was only more. At some point he began to forget that it would end. Minutes felt like hours, and hours like an eternity. Danny was strapped to the table, alone in the room, a shell of himself when the door opened once again. He didn't open his eyes or demonstrate his fear. He'd salvaged that much control over his body. At any moment a gloved hand would touch his leg. The wire would be carefully slipped into one of the holes. The machine's whir would scream to life and his body would begin to shudder. At any moment. But that moment did not come. Instead, a new voice. He didn't hear the words, only the sound of the voice. It took him only a few seconds to connect the voice to the warden, and with that connection came the memory that the warden had said he'd come back when the ordeal was over. The words gained meaning. That I don't enjoy this any more than you do. But it was necessary. The punishment was finished. The pain was done. Danny's chest rose and fell as his mind wrapped itself around the warden's voice. Danny opened his eyes and stared up at the ceiling. The doctor said you were brave. I want you to know that I appreciate that. The warden had come. Danny's mind stalled for a moment, then restarted, surging with question. It was done. No, it was only a ploy. And yet he'd said he would come at the end. It's finished. The warden walked up to the table. From the deepest parts of Danny's soul rose an emotion that he could never have anticipated. It started out as relief but then suddenly became more. Much more. That made the pain he'd felt a distant memory. I'm sorry, Danny. I truly am. You have to believe that I wish this on no one. Danny connected his intense relief to that voice. The warden had put an end to his suffering, and for that Danny felt deeply indebted. For that he owed the man his life. For that he loved the man. He slowly released his grip on the rubber bit between his teeth. The blurred image of the warden's face looked down at him. There was concern in his eyes. It is finished, Danny. No more. But you didn't obey me, you understand that. Don't you? I don't like this any more than a loving father enjoys punishing his son. The warden turned his head and looked at the wall, which held the restraints. They'd strapped Danny into the last time he had visited deep meditation. I lost my children, but the truth is I've gained so many more, he said in an introspective tone. They're all like sons to me. Even Slane. But Slane refused to accept my help. The terrible task of guiding them to the light falls on my shoulders now. It's the only way I can honor my own son and daughter. The warden faced him, frowning. Say something, Danny. You're a priest, you should understand these things. Tell me that what I'm doing is right. He wanted to say something, but his mind was awash with conflict. In the warden's words, he was hearing his own thoughts of not so long ago. He'd never motivated others with the threat of sadistic punishment, but he'd killed them just the same. Just say something, for heaven's sake. It's not easy doing this sort of thing. Danny started to speak, but his voice cracked and he had to clear his throat. No, he said. It's not easy. So you approve then. The overwhelming emotion he'd felt only a minute earlier was gone. Now he felt mostly relief for himself and simple empathy for the warden. He did owe the man his life, because the man had spared his life, but he couldn't find it in himself to voice support. You see, you still don't get it, do you? But you will soon. I have great confidence in you, Danny. A profound respect. The warden let the words settle, then walked to the end of the table and began to release the leather straps that held Danny's legs. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on the firmer, more assured tone that Danny had grown accustomed to. Of depravity in your soul. Once we force it out into the light, we can go about correcting it. I hope you can appreciate that more now. He looked up at Danny. Your legs will ache for a few days, but you'd be surprised at how quickly the puncture wounds will heal. The doctor wiped the blood from his leg like a tattoo artist cleaning the skin as he worked. A transparent salve covered 5 tiny red pinpricks on his shin. I'll give you a few hours to gather yourself before they take you back up. He unfastened the straps on his left leg. It'll help if you get the blood flowing through your legs again. You'll have some bruising on your heels, your tailbone, and the back of your head, but otherwise you're no worse off for the wear. He undid the last strap and brushed his palms against each other. Almost good as new. Bend your legs for me. Danny slowly turned his ankles, then drew his stiff legs up, one at a time. A dull pain throbbed in his shin, but on balance he was surprised he didn't feel more. Thank you. The words sounded empty. It's the least I can do. Pape slipped his hand into his pocket and came around the table, staying clear of Danny's legs. You seem like a good man on the outside, but you're here because you've broken the law. You strayed from a more righteous way. Until I am confident you can be truly rehabilitated, I can't consider you for the privileged wing or for early release. I'm not asking for either. No, you're not asking, are you? The question you should be asking is, are you still a killer? I didn't kill Randall. True, but that was hardly a sufficient test. And by refusing to obey you, earned yourself some correction. You have to learn to follow my rules, Danny. No one else's, only mine. Do that and perhaps you'll win my confidence. It's really that simple, even if it means killing. If I command it, yes. Trust me, I've taken a vow of nonviolence. I'm not sure you know who God is. Don't be absurd. God is God. They're all the same. All of this so that I'll kill again. No, all of this so that you never will unless I demand it. I need to lay you bare to see who you really are. The warden lowered his arms. I'll leave you to consider that. Hopefully the worst is behind us. Pape headed for the door but turned back when he'd opened it. Oh, and a bit of news you might find interesting. Renee has decided to join us. She brought along a new friend. Danny blinked. Renee. Yes, Renee. She's been put through the ringer and finally led here, where she can be of some use to all of us. Maybe she can fill Peter's shoes. Maybe you'll get a conjugal visit out of it. Remember to move your legs around. Good for the circulation. Danny didn't hear the door shut. He heard nothing but the roar of blood rushing through his head. He didn't actually see the warden leave. 34. Just like that, Keith and I had broken into Basil and were being given a quick tour by Michael Banning, the warden's assistant, and no one was stopping us. All was at ease. The inmates were hanging out in small groups over card games, or wasting time alone, when we entered the common area, but we managed to attract most of their attention. I did, that is. All of the guards I'd seen were men. I was a woman. A cute blonde with teacher glasses. It made me wonder if the warden knew something in particular when he'd suggested that there were men here who'd like to get to know me better. The yards through that door, Banning was saying, motioning across the large common area. Think of the layout as like a compass cross and you won't get lost. Administration behind us, that's north. Infirmary, cafeteria, recreation, etc. Directly opposite, south. Commons, the largest wing, to our right, west. And the privileged wing, east. Privileged, Heath said. He'd left his coat and his briefcase with the receptionist. Everything we needed was on me, under my loose slacks. Essentially an honors program for qualified members who earn certain privileges. Best accommodations in the state. I see. And segregation. Below the administration wing. If you need access, just let me know. We will, I said. Of course. You'd like to go there first. Yes, I said. Heath glanced at me. Give us half an hour to conduct a few interviews among the general population first. Of course. Something was wrong. I knew it in my bones. Sicko was still out there, and we didn't know who he was. Danny was in here and we didn't know where. His name wasn't on the roster given to us by the warden's assistant, and in my mind that meant he must be in the hole. I had to get to Danny. I had to see him. I had to speak to him and give him the letter, but we couldn't ask for him by name because that might raise suspicions. We also had to get to Randall, and his name was on the register, cell 134 in the Commons wing. Right, I said. Banning glanced between us, then motioned at the south wing. Our milk stocks behind the cafeteria. You sure you won't need me to accompany you? It would make. That's generous of you, but it is better for us to maintain the integrity of our inquiries, Heath said. He lifted the stapled roster already open to the third page and marked off a few names. If you could please inform these inmates that we'd like to speak to them in their cells, we would appreciate it. He handed the clipboard to Banning, who quickly scanned the list. Watkins, Collins, Randall. I can assure you of their full cooperation. No assurances needed. Just have them report to their cells as soon as possible. We'll take it from here. Of course. He handed the roster back, lifted his radio, and passed the instructions on to a Colorado, who came back over the air and informed Banning that members Collins and Randall were in the wing and would be in their cells. Watkins was either in the hard yard or the privileged wing. They would track him down immediately. The staff all knows you're here, Banning said, and handed the radio to Heath. The prison is yours. If you need anything at all, just call on that channel. We'll have a special response team standing by, but I wouldn't worry. You'll find our members to be cooperative in every way. We're very proud of our program. I'm sure you are. Banning didn't seem eager to let us go, despite all of his assurances. He finally nodded. Well then, I guess I'm done here. Heath nodded once, dismissing the man as anyone accustomed to authority might. I was a basket case under my short blonde wig and stony mask, but Keith's training as a sheriff kept our cover smooth. The warden's assistant turned and left us on our own. Where's Danny? I whispered, keeping my eyes forward. We'll get to him. First things first. Then Randall first, I said. We'd planned on getting a few samples of milk. Agreed, he said. I don't like it. Just stay focused. We'll find him. Let's go. I walked next to Keith as we headed through the huge domed atrium, struck by just how different Basil was compared to what I'd seen of Ironwood. New and clean, for one thing. Ordered and quiet. My experience visiting Danny was always filled with prying eyes, chattering wives, and families in a crowded visiting room. Kids crawling on the dirty floor, crying. Basil looked more like a casual resort. The inmates were called members and dressed in neat dark blue slacks and tan shirts. The guards all wore black, cleaned and pressed. If they had weapons, they were hidden. I took it all in, but my mind was buzzing with images of Danny. I was scanning for him, searching every face and coming up only with winks, smiles, and scattered comments as we passed. Welcome to Basil, honey. Any time, baby. None of it was loud or obnoxious, just isolated men reacting to a woman. I expected nothing less. If anything, their natural behavior took some of the edge off my anxiety. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that Banning was talking idly to a CO by the door to the administration wing. Danny was below them in the bowels of the prison, I was sure of it. I wanted to grab Banning by the collar and demand he immediately take me to the member named Danny Hansen who wasn't on their roster. I wanted to throw myself into Danny's arms and tell him that I had come to save him. That I'd found a way to get him out of here. I'd found the judge whose son Danny had killed. The man would help us, because I'd heard his confession and would tell the world of his own crimes if he didn't help us. The Commons wing was a long hall with 2 tiers of cells on one side and a guard station on the other. The station was unmanned. Was that normal? I didn't have time to worry. We were suddenly there, not only inside Basil, but 20 yards from a cell on the ground floor with the numbers 134 stenciled in black above the barred door. 2 members leaning on the upper tier railing watched us idly as I followed Heath toward Bruce Randell's cell. Nice, one of the men muttered. The whole thing was utterly surreal. The towering gray walls, the barred cages. For convicted criminals like Danny, the raw power of incarceration in the great state of California reinforced by billions of dollars and millions of tons of concrete. And there we were in the middle of it all, audacious enough to think we could walk in and out with impunity. Just like that. I slowed and trailed Keith as we approached the door to Randell's cell, unsure how I felt about seeing Danny's enemy. We had to make Randell our friend, because it wasn't enough to put him on notice that we were going to bust his chops wide open if he touched one hair on Danny's body. We also had to convince him to take our side. We might have gotten the keys to the prison, but we needed the keys to the warden and to Danny. Heath spoke before I could see who was inside the cell. Bruce Randell. No answer. I stepped up and saw a large man with a pitted face and light hair staring over a book from the lower bunk, unimpressed. Heath showed the man his badge. We're with the Inspector General's office. And we'd like to ask you a few questions. Randell sat up, immediately more amenable than he'd initially appeared. Naturally. Among other things, OIG stood alongside prisoners by investigating their grievances. He stood and dropped the book onto the bed. His eyes glanced down my body, then met my own. I had expected to feel rage and was surprised when I didn't. I only wanted him to help me save Danny now. Can we come in? Heath asked. What's this about? Just a few questions about the milk supply. We've had complaints about spiking. Randell nodded once and stepped back. I followed Keith into the cell, leaving the door open behind me. There was little privacy, but the cells on either side were unoccupied and no other members were close enough to hear us if we kept our voices down. Have a seat. Heath motioned to the bed. I'd rather stand. Sure. I don't see why not. I'd rather you sit, I said. Sheriff who'd put him behind bars, but clearly he didn't. The dye and facial hair threw him off. Bruce Randell. Number. Bruce rattled it off. You've been here how long? Here or in prison? In prison. 8 years. What were you convicted of, Bruce? Distribution. So you know substances, I take it. You could say that. I used to. Anyways. Heath lifted his eyes and stared at the man. How about in Basil? Any that you know of? Nope. Really? Because that's not what we've been told. What do you know about the milk here in Basil? Randell just looked at him and it struck me that maybe he actually did know something about spiked milk in Basil. I knew that Keith wanted to play it out and go through the questioning as we'd agreed to, but that was before I knew Danny was missing. There was an open door at my back and beyond it a prison with a warden who might be breathing down our backs. I couldn't think of any reason to wait, so I stepped in front of Keith, hoping his body made a good enough shield behind me, and cut to the chase. Do you know a woman named Constance? He shook his head. Don't think so. Nope. His eyes were blank, not a hint of recognition. I'd expected to open the door with that question, but his reaction took me off guard. You know nothing about a finger in a shoebox. It took him a moment to digest the question before a smirk crossed his face. You're joking, right? Nope. Behind me, Keith cleared his throat. This wasn't the plan, I knew that, but it was now. What about $1 million? I pressed. Does that ring a bell? Sure, I'll take $1 million. You gonna get me out of here so I can spend it. Not even a hint that he knew about Sicko's game. But he had to know how. So you're saying you don't know a thing about any threats to anyone involving body parts or missing drug money? I honestly don't have a clue what you're talking about, lady. And what about a priest? No, any priests. His eyes flinched and I knew two things. One, Randall really didn't know anything about Constance or drug money. That had to be Sicko's doing, which confirmed our assumption that Randall wasn't Sicko. 2. Randall not only did know Danny, but there was history between them. Danny Hansen, I pushed. You know, the priest who was transferred to Basel 10 days ago. What can you tell us about Danny? Nothing. He was lying. I think what Julia's trying to ask. Not now, Keith, I said. We don't have time. You see, my partner and I sometimes play good cop, bad cop. Him good, me bad. But we're in a rush, so I'm gonna get straight to the point. This whole prison is about to blow sky high, Mr. Randall. We're going to give you about 3 minutes to decide if you want to go up with it. Fair enough. He stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Keith was probably thinking the same thing. I'd mistakenly used his real name. Why are you messing with Danny? I asked. I don't know what you're talking about. Seriously. I was incredulous. You're actually going to drag this out. We know about the threats to Danny's life. We know what's going on in Basel. We just need to decide who goes down with the warden. You're lying, he said. This some kind of test. A test by who? The warden. Because I'll tell you this, I don't care what the wardens told you, it is over. If we don't find Danny alive and well, it is all going to lead back to you, and you're going to end up on a bus to death row. For a moment Randall looked like he might capitulate, but then his jaw slowly firmed. Whatever hold the warden had over him, it was strong. My ploy wasn't going to work. So I bent over, hiked up my right pant leg, and pulled out the Beretta I'd strapped to my calf. Keith touched my shoulder. Renee, I stepped forward and shoved the gun below Randall's belt. He jerked back, grasped the basin with both hands, and stared down at the gun. I knew I couldn't shoot in here. The gun was only meant to be used for leverage if we needed it. But it was loaded and my finger was already tightening. Now you listen to me, you pig. I know you were abused by a priest when you were a boy, but the priest you're messing with now is going to get you killed. The state knows everything. We're here because we have reason to believe there's a direct threat to Danny's life as we speak. You're either going to tell me where he is or I'm going to shoot off your toe. I don't know where he is. His face was flushed red. I had his attention. Renee, not now, Keith. To Randall. Is Danny alive? His eyes were frantic, looking at me, then at Keith over my head. Tell me. I gave the gun a shove. I didn't kill him, I swear he was alive last time I saw him. When did you see him alive? He wavered, grasping for the meaning of a woman with an OIG badge. shoving a gun at him in his prison cell. I didn't want him to think it through. I wanted him to react without thought. You protect the warden and you go down with him. When? 2 nights ago. Where? In the hard yard. What did you do to him? He made me. I'm only doing what I have to do to stay alive in this place. They killed Slane right in front of me. Where's the priest? I don't know. We'd been urgent, not loud, but Randall's last denial rang through the hall. Shut up, I snapped. Where would he be? In the hole. Segregation. No, the other hole. Which hole? His eyes were filled with fear. Where is it? I don't know. How could you not? I blinked. The information quickly settled into my gut. Blindfolds. The warden was a brute who was playing games with his inmates. Randall was a pawn who knew nothing. Constance had been a pawn. Messengers and thugs. We have what we need, Renee. Heath gently pulled me back by my shoulder. We'd both used our real names, but it didn't matter now. Heath stepped up to Randall and squeezed his face with a strong hand. Now, I'm only going to say this once, so you listen carefully, you hear. We had come into Sicko's house. It had to be the warden. We were already naked here. We had to get to Danny and get out. One word of this to anyone, and I'm going to make sure you end up on San Quentin's death row for the rest of your life. Not a fun place. Keep your mouth shut and we'll get you out early. And forget about the warden's threats, he's finished. You don't understand. No, you don't. Heath released the man's face and slapped him. It's over. You either go up or you go down. End of story. Heath, we have to go. I said. He glared at Randall, then turned around, face flushed. Put that thing away, he said, flipping his hand at my gun. Danny was being held somewhere off the prison's blueprints, in a hole that made a man as strong as Randall cringe. Heath and I knew we had to find Danny now, but only I knew how. I was going to put a gun to Michael Banning's head and force him to take us to Danny. I shoved the gun under the strap at my calf, pulled my pant leg down over it, and hurried to catch Keith, who had just cleared the cell's door and pulled up to wait for me. So I'd thought, but I was wrong. The sight that greeted me when I stepped out of Bruce Randall's cell stopped me beside Keith. Not 10 feet away stood a thick man with a blonde crew cut flanked by 2 commanding officers in black. Both of them had rifles hooked in the crooks of their elbows, a major breach of security protocol in any California prison, I knew. Firearms were only permitted in gun rails, towers, and control booths, out of reach of any prisoner, bar none. The man with the crew cut looked amused. I hear you guys need an escort, he said. Heath started forward. That won't be necessary. We were just finishing up. The man held up a hand. I'm afraid the warden insists. I told myself to run. It had all gone wrong. Instead I pulled, no calls. Put the phone down. Now. This isn't your business. Well now, that's funny, because the warden told me it was. He instructed me to come find you and escort you. He said go find Renee Gilmore and Keith Hammond and bring them to me. Drop the phone. I glanced at Keith, who nodded. I dropped the phone on the concrete. My heart was pounding. The warden knew our names, which meant he knew everything. The CO flashed a grin. Captain Bostich, here to serve. Now if you'd please, follow me. This was all a mistake. Basil was official property of the state of California. An institution protected by checks and balances meant to ensure the humane treatment of all prisoners. I was only here because someone, the warden, was going to break through all of those layers of protection to destroy Danny. In the end, none of these thoughts got my feet moving or wiped the smirk off the captain's face. Let's go, honey. He has plans for you. 35. The emotions that raged through Danny as he lay on the table in deep meditation brought not a shred of reason with them. If not for years of training in the bloodied fields of battle, he would have reacted to the warden's words as any man might. He would have thrown himself against the restraints on his arms and screamed in a futile attempt to free himself. But when he learned that the warden had been manipulating Renee all along, and had led her to Basil to break him by abusing her, he reacted as only a man with so much training might. He did nothing. Rash movement would get them both killed. Nothing prudent could be done without thought. The only problem was, his mind wasn't immediately capable of clear thought. It was fractured by a week of horror and 2 days of torture, and now it was frozen by a kind of rage and bitterness he didn't know existed. He didn't thrash pointlessly against his restraints. He lay shaking with rage, trying to grasp at some kind of meaning. Like demonic drones, the warden's words whispered through his mind. "She's been put through the ringer," they said, and Danny tried to think of what Pape meant when he said ringer. And then he tried not to because the thoughts were too ugly. She was led here, the words said, and Danny tried to think of how that could be. Led how? Under what threat? What terror had drawn her? "Maybe she can fill Peter's shoes," he'd said. The rage that came with those words shut his mind down again. He tried to move, he really did, but he wasn't thinking right. "Maybe she can fill Peter's shoes," the warden had said. For the first time in 2 days, Danny's mind was merciful to him and shut down completely. His world faded to black and his shaking stopped. 36. My meltdown began with that phone call 10 days earlier, but sitting in the corner of that dark holding cell at the back of the administration wing, I faded away to nothing. There was nothing left. I had propped myself up with a blazing sense of purpose and hope for 10 days, and just like that it had all been crushed in one final blow. It was done. Finished. I tried to think of a way out, but as Keith had first said, breaking into prison was one thing. Breaking out was another. And this wasn't just any prison, it was Basil. I didn't even question how it could be done. I knew that it couldn't, not now. Not in time to save Danny, not in time to save ourselves. The cell the captain had taken us to was a 10 by 10 concrete room with a thick metal door. Nothing else except for the fluorescent light on the ceiling, which was off. They'd marched us through back halls at gunpoint and ushered us into the cell. Without saying another word, with each step I tried to tell myself that something would happen to fix this. The real authorities would come busting in to free us. Keith would throw himself at the guards and give me a chance to escape. Danny would run through the door and save us. But it was totally hopeless, and I knew that. Keith tried to reason with the captain, promising to bring the whole prison down under a storm of controversy that would put them all behind their own bars. He was an attorney and knew the law. He had contacts in law enforcement on the outside. He knew congressmen and senators. His threats fell on deaf ears, and with an ashen-faced glance at me, Keith gave up. He sat on the floor beside me, slumped against the wall. Neither of us spoke. For a few minutes, my mind was lost. "You realize what this means," he said. It was a statement, not a question, and I knew the answer. "The warden can't let us leave this place," I said. "We know too much. He's going to kill us." "No one even knows we're here," he said. "The records have us as Julia Wishart and Miles Somerset. None of the inmates or guards have any idea what we really look like. There's not a single bit of evidence that Keith Hammond and Renee Gilmore ever came to Basil." I hadn't thought about that. They're torturing the inmates here. The only way that happens without an OIG investigation is through a high level of planning and control. Brainwashing, even. The warden was one step ahead of us all the way. He already knows how this is going to end. I sat like a lump in that corner, feeling ill. Too sick to cry anymore. 100 thoughts crammed into my mind. What if I'd gone to the police at the beginning? What if I'd hired the biggest law firm on Wilshire? What if I'd refused to let Danny turn himself into the authorities 3 years ago? But none of the questions had any answers. I'm scared. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. So what now? Now we hope we can convince the warden to let us go. But he won't. Maybe I can call his bluff, say I have a file that will be released to the press. If we're not home in 24 hours. Something maybe, I said. But then neither of us said anything because we both knew. The warden was too smart for any of that. Realization slowly settled in my mind. All along Sicko's plan was to get me to break into his sick, twisted prison to save Danny. It suddenly made more sense than anything else. The escalating threats, the constant pressure, the progression of the game, all of it led me here, into his own house to crush Danny. That's why he led us to the judge, I said, eyes straining in the darkness. He needed us to think we were outwitting him. Maybe. But why? Revenge. Keith sat for a moment. There's something you're not telling me, Renee. Something about who would go to all this trouble to set things straight with Danny. If we knew who I told you, I don't know. The only victims I know about are dead. Because that's the key to this whole thing. Who? If we knew, we might be. I think it is the warden. But I don't know what he's got against Danny. The door suddenly rattled, then swung open. Backlit by the hall stood the tall form of the warden, Marshal Pape, in his crisp suit, hand on the doorknob. He reached over and flipped a switch. The overhead light stuttered to life. The warden stepped inside, slid his hand into his pocket, and smiled down at us. Keith started to get up, but the warden stopped him. Please, remain seated. We don't have much time. Keith eased back to his seat. I thought it would only be fair to explain why I'm going to allow what's about to happen, the warden said. The common man might cringe, but he can't understand this world any more than the politicians who pass the laws do. They send us deviants and then pass more laws that make correcting their ways impossible. Basil's all about learning to do it right. I stared up at him, filled with hatred. I hated the smug curve of his lips as he spoke, the round spectacles balanced on his nose, his manicured fingernails, his perfectly pressed suit. His self-righteousness made me sick. This was a stoning and he was going to cast the first stone. There's a reason for the law, my friends. Breaking it comes with consequence. But before you're punished you have the right to know what you've done wrong. You make me sick, I said. And you, me. He clasped his hands behind his back. Danny's guilty for many crimes that he hasn't confessed yet. His deal with the DA was a sham. He has so much to learn from me. Now you two have broken the law in my house, and I don't take that lightly. As punishment, I'm going to use you to break him. I hope you'll understand the justice of that. If his words were meant to unnerve me, they didn't. I felt only rage. Marshal Pape's twisted philosophy of punishment defied reason. I stared at him, too furious to speak. You should have known better, you really should have. But now it is too late. The sad part is that you still don't really have a clue. It's going to get very ugly, but in that you will see that I'm not your devil, Renee. By the way, I think Sicko's an adorable name. It's so. The darkness as the warden's words rang in my head. I tried not to think about what he meant by very ugly, but endless images burrowed into my mind. I had to be strong, I knew that, but my strength was all gone. Tears began to fall down my cheeks. It was all so wrong. I hardly could remember what had happened to get me into that cell at Basil. I'm so sorry, Renee. Keith rested his hand on my knees. My tears swelled. I couldn't speak past the knot in my throat. Listen to me, this isn't over. There's still Danny. He may still find a way. I began to sob quietly in the darkness. I knew Keith was only saying that for my benefit, but he couldn't have said anything more appropriate to me in that moment. 37. When Danny's mind awoke, it did so slowly, like a slug crawling from a hole in the ground. Though the restraints no longer held him down, he was still on the table where the doctor had worked over him for 2 days. The light bulb still glowed on the ceiling above him. His chest still rose and fell in a steady rhythm. A dense fog hung over his mind, but he was alive. The torture was finished. He remembered that much. There was something else. He couldn't put his mind on it. He tried to lift his head, but pain flared in his neck and he abandoned the attempt. The warden had told him to move his legs. It was strange that this memory came to him even before the memory that the warden had come at all, but he'd felt pain in his neck and that pain had somehow triggered. Danny blinked. The warden had come. He'd said something important. Ignoring the pain in his neck this time, Danny lifted his head off the table and stared down at his feet. Red pinpricks dotted his shin. The leather straps that had held his legs dangled over the sides of the table. But the warden had said something, and as Danny lay with his head cocked up, the words came to him in one lump sum. "Renee has decided to join us." He'd passed out. This time Danny moved without calculation. He threw the full weight of his left leg over his right and rolled against the 2 restraints that bound his arms to the table by his sides. There was no reason in the movement, only a raw reaction. Instinct stripped bare of the training that might hold it in check. The sudden shift in weight tipped the table as if it had been shoved by an angry rhino. The whole thing twisted wildly under him, wrenching his bound arms as he crashed toward the floor. But he got his feet down first. Both of them. He stood half bent with the wooden table strapped to his arms behind him. Balanced on one of its legs. Pain sliced through his strained shoulders. He grunted. But now his thinking was more precise, and his next movement was fully intended for a single purpose: to be freed from the monstrosity on his back. Roaring as much from pain as rage, he hefted the table onto his back, spun around with all of his strength, and slammed the table into the concrete wall. Wood cracked, but he wasn't free. So he did it again, grunting loudly as the table crashed into the wall a second time. And a third. But the table didn't break apart. Instead, the strap that held his left arm snapped on the 4th try. 10 seconds later, Danny stood in the middle of the room next to the inverted, broken table, now missing 3 of its legs. He was still locked in the cell, but setting himself free of the table wasn't pointless. They would be coming for him, he was sure of that. The warden's intentions were plain. He was going to use Renee as he'd used young Peter, as a means of breaking Danny. Pape would keep her alive until then. They wouldn't know that he'd broken free or that he now had the table legs and splinters of wood to use as weapons. Bostich would have to open the door to the cell, and when he did, Danny would kill him in any one of several ways that quickly came to mind. Why? In a moment of clarity he knew that he'd vacated his resolve to eschew violence, regardless of the impulse that called for it. No matter what the situation. He stood up straight, taken by the deep conflict in front of him. And then, another question struck him. Why had the warden left him in a cell with his legs free and a table to break? Why had he told Danny about Renee? The man was as shrewd as any Danny had known. He glanced down at the leather belt still buckled around his right forearm. It had broken an inch from the buckle, but the rough edge of the tear didn't run the full width of the leather. It had been cut with a knife 2/3 of the way through. The same with the strap on his left arm. The warden had assumed he'd try to free himself once he'd learned that Renee was in the prison. Why? Because he wanted Danny to break out of the deep meditation cell. Why? Because he intended to lead Danny into a trap. But that same trap could have been just as easily set by leading Danny with misinformation. Knowing about Danny's unshakable love for Renee, the warden might have only claimed to have Renee. How would Danny know the difference? Renee might very well be safe at home, oblivious to the warden's twisted games. Danny allowed the thought to wash him, but the moment of reprieve was short-lived because it struck him just as quickly that he could be wrong. The warden might actually have Renee up in the prison as he'd claimed. And with that mushrooming thought, his instinct to save her at any cost reasserted itself like a hurricane slamming into an island. He stared at the door. The lock was on the outside. There was no getting past it. If the warden intended to draw him into a trap, he would have left the door unlocked. Danny moved forward on numb legs, eyes on the handle. If the door was open, he would go, even knowing that he was being led. He could not remain here while she might be suffering. He stepped up to the door, put his hand on the latch, and twisted. The latch moved freely and the door pulled open. His pulse surged. It could only mean that the warden did have Renee. He'd made a way for Danny to find her, knowing that he did not have the strength to allow her to suffer. Knowing that Danny would follow his heart and try to save her. The light behind him cast a glow down a corridor that ended in 20 feet. Before turning to the right. From there he knew he would climb one set of stairs to the segregation wing. And another to the administrative wing. Why had the warden gone to this trouble? Why hadn't he just come for Danny? And led him to Renee? But then Danny knew. Pape wanted him to come of his own will, even knowing it was a trap. He wanted to lead him as he'd led Renee. The act of going to save someone invested a person in the rescue and intensified the pain of any failure. The crushing of hope, however thin that hope, was more miserable than having no hope at all. Even knowing that his disposition now was to overthrow his vows, knowing he was throwing himself on the mercy of his own emotions, Danny retreated, picked up 2 large splinters of wood, each roughly a hand's span, and slipped them under the waistband of his shorts. One of the table legs had split off at an angle so that it formed a sharp wedge at one end. He grabbed it and strode for the door. So, then, it came down to this. There was no more room for ideology or thinking. It was Renee up there now, not him. He would crush them all to save his bride. And if, 38, I kept telling myself the same thing as 2 guards handcuffed Keith and me and led us through the prison. This was all a misunderstanding. It was a mistake. This was the United States of America. This was California. There were laws, as the warden himself so aptly pointed out, and those laws prohibited the abuse of its citizens, both in and out of prison. As soon as the warden understood that we really hadn't hurt anyone, his thinking would change. As soon as he reflected on how absurd his intentions were, he would come to his mind and return us to a conference room, where we could sit down like civilized people and discuss each of our mistakes. No foul, no harm. But I knew that I was wrong. This really was my Jonestown, and there really was a new Jim Jones in town, living out his own twisted vision of good and evil right under America's nose. The world had been shocked by the deaths of the 900 people who'd died at Jonestown, because no one believed the rumors of abuse leading up to the massacre. It wasn't possible. It was too much. It was preposterous. Maybe it could happen in the Dark Ages or in Nazi Germany, but not today. Not in California. Not in the United States of America. But there I was, like a lamb being led to my own slaughter, and the worst thing about it all was that Keith was right. No one even knew that we were at Basel, not as Renee Gilmore and Keith Hammond. The pieces had fallen almost perfectly into a puzzle of Marshall Pape's design. But I'd given up trying to figure out exactly how and just faced the fact that they had. The prison was a ghost town. They'd cleared it before we were led through the domed hub. The inmates were probably locked down in their own cells, a common enough occurrence in most prisons. It was usually a form of restriction following an incident that required investigation, or a preventive measure against exacerbation of the incident. Today, Keith and I were that incident. Danny was that incident. The warden had cleared the prison so that he could deal with us as he wished. The captain jabbed his chin at the far side of the room. This way. Heath's tie was gone and his white shirt, sleeves rolled up, was smudged along the arms and back where he'd leaned against the wall. He still wore his leather shoes and dark blue slacks. There were no other guards on duty that I could see. The doors out to the main yard were closed, as were the doors to the housing wings. "Danny, where are you?" We were herded toward the section of Basel that held the infirmary and the cafeteria, but we passed them both and turned into a small hall. It ended at a door under a sign that said recreation room. The captain reached for the door and offered me a twisted grin. "Welcome to the hard yard." He pulled the door open and stepped aside with the handle still in his hand. From my vantage, I could see only a gray concrete room. No people. But my mind's eye saw images of black and white pictures from old documentaries. Gas chambers from Auschwitz. Slaughterhouses and abandoned basements. I glanced up at Keith, who was staring in, face masked in stone. His words from the holding cell returned to me. "This isn't over." I'd been consumed with Danny and myself, but looking at his stark hazel eyes, I saw a man who'd been pulled into a nightmare because I convinced him to help a damaged woman save the man she loved. Keith was connected through Randall. Yes, but as it turned out, Randall had much less to do with the threat against Danny than either of us had thought. Like me, Keith had done what he thought was right. Conscience had only brought him here, to a place called the Hard Yard, inside of the prison called Basel, which meant core. Hardcore. The captain wagged his head through the open doorway. "Let's go." It was my Jonestown, but it was also the place where I might see Danny, and so it was with a conflicted mind that I stepped inside their hard yard. The room was concrete on all sides except the ceiling, which was made of a mesh wire supported by several metal beams. The towering concrete walls sent a chill down my back. It was as if I had just stepped into my own graveyard. This was my tomb, my crypt, my slaughterhouse, the place where I would finally rest at the end of my life's search for peace. My eyes flitted over the rest of the room. A sea of faces stared at me, but none of them belonged to Danny. My heart crumbled. Besides the captain and the guard who'd brought us, there were 4 other cuz in the room, one in each corner, all armed with illicit rifles. Bruce Randall stared at me from the center of the line. I was going to die. That was how I was thinking of it, but in the most trying times I had a way of letting all of my neurotic tendencies sink into the floor and becoming stronger. I was going to die here. Heath knew that. I knew that. Danny would soon know that. But maybe I was going to take Pape with me. A low wolf whistle from one of the inmates broke the silence. "Quiet," the warden said. "This isn't a whorehouse." He returned his stare to me, face still flat. The captain removed my handcuffs and shoved me from behind. I stumbled forward to the center of the room and was joined by Keith. For long seconds no one spoke. I scanned the faces of the inmates, trying to guess their intentions or, worse, the warden's intentions for them. "Look at me," my eyes told them. "I'm only a skinny woman who needs your sympathy. The real ogre's over there. He's the one who we should all fear." Some were in their 20s, but most were in their 30s or 40s, covered in prison tattoos. Just men, like Danny, who'd been sucked into Marshall Pape's monster factory. But they didn't look like monsters. One had whistled, yes, and 2 or 3 eyed me with interest, but their eyes weren't dripping with lust. In fact, most of them looked at me with uncertainty, even sympathy. An older man sat at the far end, legs crossed underneath him, and on his face I saw a sad regret I might have expected from my own father, if he were still alive and there. I was desperate, I know, but I really did feel a surprising sense of kinship with My fellow prisoners at that moment. We were all under the same heel. I knew they were going to hurt me, but as I stared into the prisoners' eyes, I saw Danny. These were the kind of men he'd lived with for the past 3 years. These were the members of his world now. These were the ones he'd chosen to love. Even Randall, who on closer inspection looked uncertain, not vengeful. What we have here, my friends, the warden said, withdrawing his hands from the pockets, is a perfect lesson in what's so wrong with the world. You see a man and a woman in front of you. They came to our institution under false pretenses, pretending to be two people they were not. But isn't that the way it is with everyone who comes to this place? Layers strip you all down to your naked selves, and reveal the pathetic truth of your nature so that it can be rehabilitated. All things must become new, and sometimes that's an ugly process. The warden wagged his head toward the inmates seated against the wall. The men you see aren't here by accident. They cannot and will not run to your law, because they're under mine now. They know the cost of breaking my law is far too high to endure for very long, much less forever. Basil was his religion. The inmates were his flock. It made me sick. The question I put to you two today is, who are you underneath it all? He looked between Keith and me. Please show them who you really are. Both of you. I'd forgotten about my blonde wig, and it took me a moment to understand what he was asking. But then Keith reached up and started peeling off the goatee and mustache he'd glued to his face. I pulled off my wig. I'd left the glasses in the holding room. They were pointless anyway. You see, they aren't Julia and Miles, after all. They broke into my prison with the intention of killing Randall, because they believed Randall intended to kill the priest. He walked up to me, and I suppressed a sudden urge to spit in his face. Because for a moment he ceased being human in my eyes. The warden began to pull the pins out of my hair, letting it fall around my shoulders. So pretty on the outside, he said. But inside no different from slain. He continued pulling down my hair. You've abused me, he said matter-of-factly. You've breached my walls and violated my sanctuary. And that is no less of an offense than the torturing or taking of another human being. So now I have no choice but to return the favor. An eye for an eye, as we all know. You can't do this, Keith bit off under his breath. Oh, but you're wrong. I can. This is Basil, and in Basil, I preside. It hit me that this might have nothing to do with Danny. The warden was going to let them hurt me and Danny would be nowhere near to stop them. Maybe he was already dead. My breathing thickened. Now that the preliminaries are out of the way, let's get on with the messy business, shall we? How can you stand here and... It was as far as Keith got before the warden slapped him. Keith glared, face flushed. I had never seen such a look of hatred from Keith. And seeing him stand up to the warden turned to me. Take off your pants. No. Keith's objection earned another slap, this time backhanded, hard. Enough to startle me. Bear yourself. The warden thundered. Show us who you really are. Danny had worked his way through the underground passages and found his way to the administrative segregation wing. No guards. No attempt to stop him. They knew. They had to know. Why else would they have left the cell open and let him pass? It was all planned. Danny wasn't about to execute some clever, 11th hour rescue that would sweep Renee from danger without significant collateral damage. But he could not stop, because he also knew that he had to go to her. There were other possibilities. He could make an attempt to gain a hostage. He could hole himself up in the warden's office and threaten to expose the prison. He could find a more suitable weapon, a knife or a gun. He could try to get to a phone and an outside line and call the authorities. But the warden was no fool. All his bases would be covered. There was only one way to save Renee. There was only one thing that the warden wanted more than Renee, and that was him. Danny was the key to her survival. Only Danny. He paused at the bottom of the concrete stairs that led up from ADSEG. Breathing hard. A single bulb lit the stairwell and exposed the sealed steel door that led into the administration wing. From there he would head down the hall to the guarded door into the main prison. They wouldn't stop him, he already knew that. They had all been instructed to let him pass, let him find Renee, let him try to save her. Let him see her die. His greatest advantage was their underestimation of his skill. They'd seen him take blows and suffer punishment, but they hadn't seen him fight. His right leg felt like it was filled with hot lead, and his head pounded with swelling pain, but none of it compared to the rage tearing at his heart. Again, a quiet voice deep within objected to the sudden change in him. An image of Renee silenced that voice. There were more ways to kill a person than to save one. 1,000 times in the yards and halls of a new thought occurred to him as he took his last few calming breaths before ascending into the warden's trap. If there was a guard stationed near the door, they might see his weapons and react out of fear, even if they'd been instructed to let him pass. They might force a confrontation early. That risk was too great. He tossed the chair leg into the corner, where it clattered and rolled to a stop. Then he pulled out the 2 pieces of splintered wood from his waistband and dropped them to the ground. Barefoot and naked now except for his shorts. It was him, it was Renee, and it was the warden. At least one of them would die, and Danny only cared that it wasn't Renee. He put his right foot on the first step and began to climb. I stood in front of the warden, dressed only in my white, short-sleeved blouse and my underwear. Standing there half naked in my bare feet, staring at Keith because I couldn't bear to look at the warden, my last strands of hope began to disintegrate. It was what Pape wanted. I looked over my shoulder at the door, begging to see something that would give me hope, but the door was closed. When I turned back, my tears were already snaking down my cheeks. I could feel my naked legs trembling beneath me. I wanted to be strong for Danny, but I couldn't seem to find any more strength in me. All of it, the warden said. I prefer that you are yourself, naked in my eyes. Keith stepped out, positioning himself between the warden and me. You've made your point. Oh, and here I thought rehabilitating Danny was my point. By holding torture over his head. Sometimes the threat of torture is the only way to get the wayward to confess their depravity. Danny is still pretending to be good. You can't force this on people. It's monstrous. Marshal Pape arched an eyebrow. Well then perhaps she would like to save herself. Would that ease your mind? He paced to his right. How about it, Renee, would you like to save yourself? I only half heard their exchange. My mind was cringing in my nakedness. I didn't know what he meant by saving myself. All you would need to do is demonstrate your willingness to follow me. Make just a simple gesture of your love for me. Was all I really heard. But he'd also used the word love and that confused me, so I didn't respond. I'll tell you what, he said. I can see you're terrified, so let's make this real. Easy. Don't bare yourself. Just give me a simple gesture to confess your allegiance to me. Choose me, and I'll set you free. Be my Judas. Give me a kiss. The room was perfectly quiet. I could feel all of their eyes on me, some sad. Some hardened by too many years in the warden's sanctuary. All I had to do was kiss him and he would spare me. It all struck me as a carefully rehearsed drama in which I, the unsuspecting victim, had been led onto the stage. Nausea was flooding my belly and rising up through my chest. I had to be strong. I knew that. I had to save myself so that I could save Danny. But I couldn't move my feet. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. No, not even a simple single expression to be saved. You're a monster, Keith growled. I'm the monster. The warden's words rang through the hard yard. He turned to the members. Is that how you see me? None of the prisoners spoke. How could they? They'd all either come to believe him or were too fearful of their own fate to question his ways. His power over them was absolute. You see, Mr. Hammond, I'm not the monster here. She is. You are. You're two puppets dangling on the end of a rope while the fires burn at your feet. The warden slowly walked up to me again, hand in his pocket now, grin screwed on his face. What would you do to save yourself, my dear? You won't remove your clothes and stand naked before me. You won't even acknowledge me with a kiss. I'll tell you what, why don't you kiss Keith here? Show me that you care about someone besides yourself and maybe I'll reconsider. He was playing with us. Manipulating. Leading us down his twisted path. Determining just what we would say or do to save ourselves. Just kiss him, and I'll reconsider. It's a sign of friendship, dear, not betrayal. Prostitutes don't kiss, you know. The thought of doing anything the warden suggested felt like a betrayal of myself. But I was desperate to stay alive. For Danny. You can't even do that, can you? The warden said. What exactly will you reconsider? Keith demanded. Everything. Isn't that what you want? She can become yours. Isn't, to get hold of myself and make a decision. I stepped over to Keith, lifted my hand to his neck, pulled his face down toward me, and kissed him. His lips were warm and he was breathing hard. Something inside of me broke, and I couldn't let go. He put his arms around me and pulled my head into his shoulder. Shish, it's okay, honey, he whispered. It's going to be okay, I promise. I clung to him as if he were my last hope in that insane world. Keith hushed me again. It's okay. Don't let them hurt me, I whispered into his shirt. Please. They won't. Behind me, the door into the hard yard crashed open. Keith lifted his head and stared. I twisted in his arms and saw what he saw. A man stood at the door, naked except for a pair of black shorts. His dark hair was swept back, wet with sweat. My heart bolted in my chest. It was Danny, staring at us with fiery eyes. I was already halfway across the room, running for him. I was already throwing myself into his arms and curling up in his chest and vowing my undying love. I was doing all of that already, but only in my mind. I hadn't moved. I was still in Keith's arms, which were tightening around me. Then I saw the 39. Danny knew that he was being led to her. He knew there were no guards to stop him because he wasn't meant to be stopped. He knew the only door that remained unlocked led to the hard yard, because Renee was in there. And he knew that when he found her, he would not like what he found. But he did not know that he would find her in the arms of a beast. He saw the whole room in the space of a breath. 4 guards stood in the corners, armed with rifles. Bostich was near the center of the room overlooking a dozen inmates seated along the wall. The warden stood close to a man who held Renee. The man was Keith Hammond. Danny had first met the man when Keith was a rising star in the sheriff's department who liked to take out his frustrations on his wife, Celine Hammond. Celine had come to confession at Danny's parish for a year, each time crying her shame. Her husband beat and abused her weekly. Danny approached Keith after failing to convince Celine to go to the police. He took the deputy to a warehouse, bound him to a chair, and spoke to him plainly about his choice to inflict suffering on his wife. Keith had shown all the humility of a belligerent bulldog, but Danny was persuasive and the man had finally capitulated, realizing he would lose his life if he did not. Unfortunately, Keith abused his wife again, and Danny would have ended his life then if not for Celine. Emboldened rather than deflated by his boast that he would beat her in spite of the death threat, she'd gone to the sheriff's department and exposed their rising star. The department offered Hammond a deal. If he stepped down and granted his wife a divorce, his secrets would remain safe with his employers. He agreed to their deal, however embittered, and Celine moved out of state 6 months later. Danny put the issue behind him. Now Keith Hammond was back, evidently here to take Renee because Danny had taken Celine from him. Keith stared at him over Renee's head and a smile pulled at his lips. The hatred in his eyes could only be that of the devil. Take your hands off of her. Keith's smile broadened. It's been a long time, my friend. Renee gasped and tried to spin free, but the man had a fistful of her hair. He jerked her back and backhanded her face. Stay. She twisted around, eyes flashing with terror. Danny. 3 of the guards lifted their rifles and trained the sights on him. It suddenly all made sense. Hammond was working with the warden. If they'd gone to such lengths, the end, too, was already orchestrated. Keith would hurt Renee, and the warden would push Danny to kill, testing him to his breaking point in an attempt to prove he hadn't truly changed. Renee's face was white. Danny. Keith's hand flashed again, striking her face with enough force to knock her down. He let Renee drop. Danny stood breathless, immobilized by indecision. They wanted him to rush forward in an attempt to save her. He couldn't play into their hands so recklessly. He had to choose the moment carefully despite the terrible rage washing through his mind. He had to act with precision. How and to what end he was no longer sure, but there had to be a way. There had always been a way. And if not, Keith grabbed Renee's hair and yanked her head off the floor. She has a new name for me, Danny. She calls me Sicko. Unless you care to stop me, I'm going to hurt her. Bad, my friend. Real bad. Danny's heart began to stutter. Sicko. Keith was sicko. I was on the floor, held by my hair. My jaw ached and my lips were bleeding from the blow, but it was all made moot by the sickening violation I felt. Every conversation between Keith and me pounded through my head. Revenge. Keith had kept insisting. One of Danny's victims was obsessed with revenge, but I'd never suspected the victim to be Keith. Now it all came to me. Constance had told me about Randall because they knew I'd go in search of the man who brought him down. Constance was working for Keith. The phone calls had come from Keith. The boy had been taken and mutilated by Keith or someone who was working with him. The 2-day waits now made perfect sense. He'd needed the time. Keith knew about Judge Keith, not the warden, was the mastermind behind it all. Keith was sicko. Everything he'd done during the last 10 days was to earn my trust and push me to the brink with nowhere to turn but to him. He wanted me in the prison, in his arms. I'd been manipulated, yes, but that didn't temper my revulsion. I'd kissed him. I lay limp on the floor, but something in me changed when I understood what Keith was trying to do. I couldn't understand all of his reasoning or the depths of his fury, but I could understand that he was getting what he wanted. He was crushing Danny. Right there. Right then. 2 more guards stood in the doorway, both wearing sidearms. Danny had stopped 10 feet in front of them, frozen, and I felt my heart breaking for him. I didn't know what the warden had subjected him to, but I knew those eyes staring at me all too well, and I was appalled by the desperation in them. No man had ever suffered so much for all the right reasons. And now his suffering was for me. I couldn't let that happen. With a ferocious grunt, I hurled myself away from Keith, twisting with all of my strength. His grip on my hair was firm and my head jerked back for a moment before it tore free, leaving Keith with strands spilling from his fingers. Then I was stumbling forward and running for Danny. I went like an angel, rushing across the room to save Danny. I wasn't thinking about anything other than comforting him. I didn't feel any danger or anger or bitterness. I only saw my broken Danny, who needed to know how beautiful he was. My intent wasn't to crash into him. I really meant to be gentle and touch him with a soft hand, but I couldn't seem to slow myself because the closer I got, the more anguish I saw in his eyes. The more I saw that he really was breaking apart, and I couldn't bear the sight. With a loud sob I plowed into him and threw my arms around his neck. His arms wrapped around my body and held me as tightly as I clung to him. I could feel his heart pounding in his chest, smell his skin, taste his sweat on my lips. Danny was like a boy in my arms, unsure and crushed, and it ripped my heart in two. No, Danny, it is okay, Danny. You've done well. His whole body, all 240 pounds of bone and muscle, began to tremble. Terrified, I pulled my head back and gently took his jaw in my right hand. No, listen to me. His eyes were closed and his face was twisted with remorse. No, Danny, listen to me. You did well. You saved me. You came for me. He was trying to stop, trying to be strong, but he couldn't. Tears began to seep from his eyes. I'd never seen him so undone. What had they done to my Danny? Or was it because he knew that there was no way out for either of us now? That he'd failed. I'm so proud of you. You haven't failed me. You've done good. My words sounded hopelessly pathetic in the face of his pain, but I couldn't bear to see him this way. I wanted to claw the warden's eyes out. I kissed his face and eyes and I tried to wipe his tears. You've done everything for me, Danny, I know that. I love you. You've done well. You've done so well. He couldn't speak, but he didn't need to. I had never felt so much like a woman as I did then, holding Danny in my arms. He could have given me no greater gift than his tears, because it was Danny, you see, and now Danny had even given up his strength for me. Only a very great and mysterious love could reduce him to this. And in truth, it was no reduction at all. The man in my arms was Danny at his greatest. He loved me. I knew it then more than I had ever known it. Danny loved me, and I loved him, and I didn't care if I lived or died anymore. As long as I was his and he was mine. But my heart was breaking because Danny's whole life came down to knowing if he'd done well. If he'd done the right thing. If his life, his work, everything he'd done to save and protect, had been done well. Only I knew the full truth. That every hour he'd spent in the dark, shivering from cold, he'd spent for me. Every blow he'd suffered to save me. Every cry of agony, every moment of torment, every turn of the screws. All for me, because he loved me. And still he was surely wondering if he'd done well. I could feel it in his quivering skin and I wanted to scream my love for him. I wanted to take his place in that moment and weep my regret for putting him through such suffering on my behalf. But all I could do was hold him and offer those simple words with tears streaming down my face. You've done well. I'm so proud of you, Danny. Nothing matters now. You've done it all so well, it doesn't matter what happens now. I'm so proud of you. My words didn't calm him. They pushed him deeper into that place of unyielding emotion, and I knew that I'd touched something beyond his own understanding, a core of his being that was beyond his breath and swept me to one side, slightly behind him. I saw the reason. Keith was walking toward us, mouth twisted in a wicked grin that made him look like he was wearing a Halloween mask. So sweet, isn't it? The man stopped, eyes on Danny. To be in the arms of the woman you love. Danny watched the man approach, then stop close enough to speak without putting himself in danger of being overheard by the inmates. Danny could have reached Keith and broken his neck before any of them could stop him, but in doing so he would leave Renee exposed long enough for one of them to end her life. You've done well, Danny. Terrible emotion he hardly understood surged through his chest again, and he forced it back down. Godfrey was there, and Randall, and a few others Danny recognized. Godfrey had tears on his cheeks. The rest looked on, stoic. She loves you, Danny. Keith spoke in a gentle tone. Trust me, I've been with her for 10 days. She loves you as much as my wife loved me. But my wife's dead, isn't she? He knew then that Keith had killed Celine. He had followed her out of state. And murdered her. You took everything from me, Keith said. My wife, my career, my life. All of it. How did you find me? Danny asked. It wasn't easy. Keith kept his voice low. Your mistake was telling me too much in your little game of manipulation. I figured out you were a priest. Your little story about the pedophile helped. A year ago I heard about a priest who'd cut a quiet deal with the DA. Having connections in the department does have its advantages, even for the scumbags they force out. So I checked it out and I found you. How could I ever forget that face? My face was covered. Not the whole time. I saw your reflection in the window, when you pulled your ski mask off as you were leaving. I'm a cop, remember? I notice things. Danny was asking the questions not for himself as much as for Renee. He had to buy her time. He had to reset the stage somehow. He'd once played a game with this man and won. Now he was caught. Wife. He had a better idea. And I liked it. The warden was Keith Hammond's brother-in-law. He probably never knew that Keith had abused his wife. Worse, he believed that Danny was responsible for his sister's death. That's right, Keith said. My wife, Celine, the one you so lovingly took from me, is Marshall's sister. She's dead because of you. When I was in a better position, I helped Marshall out from time to time. Got him a job in the prison system. Now, as you know so well, he's a warden. A bit religious for my tastes, but hey, it works for him. The warden stood across the room with his hand predictably in his pocket, watching them with smug assurance. Pape had mentioned the murder of his sister when he told Danny his tragic story, but at the time Danny had no reason to connect the name to his own life. The part of his thinking that resonates with mine is that what comes around goes around, Keith said. You took my wife and now I'm going to take yours. You took away my playmate, now I'm going to replace her with yours. An eye for an eye. How does it feel? I didn't kill Celine. You did. Danny looked over at Pape. Surely you know that much. He knows that you would say anything to save yourself, Keith said. Don't be absurd. Danny saw no value in pursuing the truth of the matter. Keith had obviously anticipated the charge. You saw Renee in my arms, Danny boy. I like it best when they come willingly without knowing what awaits them. Keith spread his hands in an open invitation. Of course, you can always try to stop it. Prove the warden's theory that you really haven't changed and need more correction. He'd love nothing more. He's become a bit obsessed with you, a man of the cloth who should know better. I think you remind him of himself. Danny looked at Renee, who was watching him. He'd forgotten how beautiful she was, how strong and yet so innocent, how smart and yet so naive. She wasn't smiling but her eyes were bright, full of courage. Her sweet voice still whispered in his ears. You've done well, Danny. But he hadn't. Not if he allowed them to torture and kill her. Not if he died, because his death would undoubtedly precede hers. They would never allow her to live now. He scanned the room again. There was only one unpredictable element in the hard yard. The members. The anxiety that had pushed him up out of deep meditation had vanished, replaced now by a stoic resolve to let his training guide his path. He could not allow any more emotion. Renee's life might depend on his ability to exercise acute control over his mind and body. Danny showed his hands in a sign of surrender and slowly stepped away from both Renee and Keith toward the others. No one stopped him. He eyed the line of members. Godfrey, Randall, all of them staring. You're all fine with this? He asked them. Of course not, Pape said. Do you think a good father likes to beat his child? My children feel as much regret and sorrow as I do. I didn't ask you. I asked them. Danny moved closer, toward the center of the room, eyes on the other members. She's an innocent woman. The warden's going to torture her in an effort to break me. That doesn't bother any of you. No one's innocent, the warden said. And that includes you. But here you stand, judging us all. It's my role in this sanctuary. And it is mine to speak the truth. Danny looked at his cellmate and spoke. Before the warden could. How about you, Godfrey? You're just going to stand by and let this happen. Are you, Randall? You saw what he did to Slain. You think you'll escape the same fate? He can't let any of you leave this place now. You know too much. The warden will destroy all of you to protect his precious sanctuary. You're just going to blindly follow him. So that's it, then. The warden stepped out. You come in here vowing to turn your cheek, and now you ask them to resist. You see what I mean, Danny? You really are a charlatan. You're finally showing your true heart, as I knew you would if pressed. And the party has hardly started. The words seared Danny's mind. Like a fire, they spread through his bones, scorching his heart with that one awful truth. In the end, he really was just as he once was. When all else failed, he would resort to violence and death to save the one he loved. He would do wrong to correct what was wrong, though he'd vowed never to do it again. And wasn't that exactly what the warden was doing, defending society from deviance by using violence to fight that violence, rather than love as Danny had vowed to love? His world suddenly made no sense to him. He was standing before the whole room, making a plea for sanity, but in the end it was his own sanity that was at risk. Danny wanted to continue his plea. The power of argument had always served him well. Had one thing in common. They were governed by their humanity, and yet they feared the warden's consequences too much to question the true nature of that humanity. Even Godfrey, who knew better but could not escape the warden's hold on his mind. You see what I mean, Danny? The warden came closer, speaking gently. Now, like a father making his final point to win his son's heart. She's right, you've done well. You just haven't done well enough. So today I'm going to let you prove yourself. Your reward will be great, I promise you. Renee could not guess how profoundly Danny had failed her. He stood tall and strong here on the floor, heroic, having endured more pain and suffering than all of them, but inside, his collapse was certain. He couldn't save her, he knew that now. Not this time. The simplicity of that realization fell into his mind as if the sky itself had shattered. The walls came thundering down and smothered him. Now you see, Danny, he couldn't save her because he simply could not become that man who had taken so many lives. The warden was saying something, but Danny couldn't hear it. Something was happening behind him, but he couldn't seem to move. You've done well, Danny. He had done well. And now Renee would pay for all that he had done so well. He had to be strong for her. He could not fail her in this way. He would look at her and she would see how great his love for her was. She knew that he would gladly give his life for her. She would understand his heart. She would take strength from his eyes. But he could not compromise his vow of nonviolence to save her. Doing so would only undo all that he had come to stand for. There could not be violence in the name of love, no matter what the circumstance. And yet Danny. Renee's thin voice cut the silence. Terror sliced through his heart. She needs you, Danny. You must be strong for her. Are you going to just stand there like a pathetic statue? The warden demanded. Struggling to remain composed, legs as heavy as lead, Danny turned it. Then he saw the reason for her fresh tears. 2 guards were setting a table down in the middle of the hard yard. This was for Renee. You've done well, Danny. You've done so well. The same doctor who'd administered his punishment had entered the room, carrying the same black case he had in the deep meditation room. He was going to subject Renee to the same torture Danny had suffered. Danny found that he could not breathe. He could not think. His mind was crumbling. 40. I don't think God himself could have stopped what happened next. Danny certainly couldn't, and so I forgave him even then, before it all ended. I'd clung to his naked chest while he trembled, you see, so I knew that he was in anguish. I'd smelled the fear on his skin and tasted the agony in his sweat. So when he stood still with his back to me, facing the other members, I knew he'd come to the end of himself. I knew that he couldn't save me. I knew that he was telling himself that he hadn't done well enough, and I was going to rush over to him and take hold of him again and try to convince him that it was all a lie. But then it all happened too fast. The warden was speaking and they were bringing in a folding table and setting it down in the middle of the room between Danny and me. A doctor walked in with a black case, which he set down on a bench next to the table. He pulled out what looked like a dentist's drills, and I knew then that he was going to do something terrible to me. Wild imaginations screamed through my mind, and in them I saw him grinding down my teeth while they held my jaw open. I saw a bit whining into my skull and into my brain. I saw a saw cutting into my spine as agonizing pain sliced through my nerves. And I knew that if I could imagine those things, the warden's punishment would be worse. I began to panic. When I spun back to Danny, he had turned around. He was watching me with dread in his eyes, like two pools of night. You're going to watch this, priest. Heath was glaring at Danny. You're going to feel the pain I felt when you stole my wife from me, and you're going to wish you were dead. And then, if you're lucky, you will be. Danny saw it all and knew that he was now faced with a moment that would forever alter his carefully constructed understanding of the world. Pushed by rage, he'd become a celebrated soldier, killing the enemy with ruthless precision until the war ended and there was no enemy to kill. To honor his mother, he'd become a priest, and then, confronted by gross injustice, he'd rescued the oppressed by once again killing, this time monsters who preyed on the weak. In both cases, he'd considered himself the arm of God in a holy war, only to learn that he'd become a monster like those he killed. An eye for an eye, a life for a life, a system of justice he could overturn only with love, by turning the other cheek and dying to save, not killing to save. But now consideration, logic, and reason yielded nothing but a terrible mystery of contradictions for which there seemed to be no answer. If God loved Keith, was Danny not also meant to love Keith? Wasn't Pape just another confused man twisted by the violence of others? Was it Danny's to judge? The doctor was going to drill into Renee's shin and tickle the nerves deep inside her bones. Danny could not bear the thought. And yet the only way to stop that pain was to destroy the guards who held the weapons, leaving their children in a nearby town fatherless and bitter. There was only one option left for him, born in that moment of intense suffering for which his mind had no answer, much less escape. He'd never surrendered his mind. He'd controlled it with uncanny vigor and suppressed it in search of peace, but he'd never surrendered it entirely, as was the practice of the mystics. This, they said, took the greatest power of all. Strap her down, the warden said. Danny's mind began to shut down. He slowly sank to his knees, steeled his thoughts as best he could, and gave in to raw emotion. The pain of surrender was far greater than the pain he'd suffered in the bowels of Basil. He did not cry out, did not weep, did not tremble. He only submitted his mind and accepted the anguish that squeezed his heart. But even as he did, he knew that his heart could not contain the pain. I watched Danny sink to his knees, and I knew that it was over. His eyes were blank and dark, and a terrible sorrow etched deep lines in his face. The sight of it was so horrible that my mind seemed to blink out. I forgot where I was. Strap her down, the warden said. I was there. I was with Danny, and I was thinking that I had to comfort him. Danny's legs suddenly gave way and he dropped, eyes now shut. Everything in the room seemed to stall. They were all watching him. I could hear his heavy breathing as he sucked air through his nostrils. I watched as Danny was in a different place, and his sorrow left no room for modesty. His muscles were strung like cords. His fists were white. Keith cursed and started for me, and only then did my mind return to my own. Horror. He was going to strap me down on the table. They were going to torture me in front of Danny. Keith's hand grabbed my arm and I cried out. It was only a single outburst of terror, but that simple tone silenced Danny's heavy breathing. The emotions ravaging Danny could not find words for expression. They were felt, not described except by approximation. Like a ravenous beast with ferocious fangs, they tore into his heart. His mind told him that he was breaking down. That, confronted by the torment of the one he loved as much as God loved her, he'd finally snapped. He had been her savior and yet now he would not save her, and the truth pushed his pain deeper into what could only be insanity. A cry sliced into his consciousness. Renee's. God help them all. He felt the last tether of emotion snap and he watched it drift away, like a balloon with a cut string. Immediately, a simple awareness awakened in Danny's being. Finally, he'd stepped past his thoughts and emotions and found himself simply and profoundly alive. But there was more. Awareness, not thought, occupied him. Awareness of light and love and a profound peace. The anger and sorrow and fear were behind him, chased into hiding by the very fabric of something new in his consciousness. Pure, unadulterated surrender to what was. To God. His eyes snapped wide and he saw Renee, and in that moment he was aware of what he must do, not through a process of thought or reason, but through simple consciousness, rooted in the very fabric of creative power and being. He would not punish. He would save. I jerked my head up and saw he'd become a different man. A switch had been thrown deep in his mind, and the Danny I once knew had come back to life. His head was lowered and a look of stoic confidence left his face plain. He moved suddenly, without uttering a single sound, hurling himself forward. The strangest thoughts overcame me then, seeing him in that state, an impossible mixture of horror and pride, a brew of anguish. He was now beyond reason, reacting only out of desperate love. There were 7 armed officers in the room and Danny had only his hands, but if there were 100 he would have done the same. 20 feet separated my priest and me, and he rushed in like a lion, head low, eyes fixed on his prey. Danny was halfway to the table before the first shot rang out. I saw the impact of the bullet as it struck his thigh, but it only knocked him sideways for 1 step and he was still rushing, undeterred, mindless of his own wound. Then Danny was in the air, hurling himself over the table with his head forward like a battering ram. His left hand snagged the edge of the table as he flew, and in that single motion he did 2 things. He tipped the table up to give me a semblance of cover, and he crashed into Keith. I saw and heard it all as I fell backward with the table on top of me. I saw Keith take a desperate step in retreat. I saw the crown of Danny's head slam into his face, saw Keith's head snap back. I heard the bridge of Keith's nose crack as Danny's full weight slammed it up into his brain. Keith was dead before he hit the ground, and Danny was sailing over his falling body. I don't know if Danny planned every move or if it came to him reflexively. But by the time he landed, he was in a roll and halfway to the guards in the near corner. The closest CO already had his rifle up and was firing. If he'd been a hunter, accustomed to taking down charging rhinos, his shot might have hit Danny, but it missed the rushing target. Fire! The warden was screaming at the other guards. Kill him! But it was all happening too fast, and the guards must have realized they would be shooting directly at the other guards. Danny struck the correctional officer's chest with the palm of his right hand and sent him. I lay on my back, head twisted, watching it all from the ground, thinking it was all impossible. There were too many men with guns aimed at Danny. He'd killed Keith and disabled 3 of the 7 armed men, but Bostich and 3 others still had their sights on him, and surely one would find its mark. And then one did. A shot crashed from my left and Danny lurched forward as a slug slammed into his back. Bostich had taken a second shot. Even when things happen so fast, or maybe especially when they do, certain images and thoughts are remarkably clear. When I saw that second bullet hit Danny, I knew that he was going to die defending me. I shoved the table away and screamed, "Danny!" I was still on my back, and the table was off of me, but it blocked my view of him. Frantic, I rolled to my side and clambered up to my knees. Danny. He was in a pile of 3 bodies, and he'd already pulled one of them over his own. 2 bullets smashed into that body before Danny rolled away and came up on one knee with the rifle at his shoulder. His jaw was fixed and his dark eyes showed no sign that he was even aware of the wounds he'd taken. It's crazy, I know, but such a surge of respect and pride flooded me that for a moment I couldn't cry out, though my mind was shrieking. Danny's first shot took Bostich in the forehead and slammed him backward onto his seat. His second chased the first, like a rolling thunderclap, toward the guard in the far corner past Bostich. The bullet struck that man's shoulder and spun him around. The man's rifle crashed to the floor. Danny shifted his aim and held the weapon on the warden. "Drop them!" he shouted. His order rang through the hard yard. There were 2 more guards in 2 opposite corners, one to Danny's right and one to his left. He kept his eyes on Marshal Pape's ashen face, keeping the other 2 in his peripheral vision. For a count of 3, no one moved. They had all just watched Danny take down 5 men in under 15 seconds, and they were probably rethinking their allegiances. The doctor stood back, hands half raised. I was on my knees. A surreal quiet settled over the room. Randall rose to his feet, eyes wide on Danny. Slowly, the others rose with him. The warden's face began to settle. A smile crept over his mouth as he stared down the length of the rifle still in Danny's hands. "You see, Danny," he said. "I knew you could do it. She's right, you've done well. Now put the gun down and let's clean up this mess." The man had the audacity to think it was over, as if this little lesson simply had proved his point that Danny had broken the law. And maybe he did, but this wasn't over. If I'd had a gun, I think I might have shot the warden myself. "Mark, Roderick, please leave your weapons on the floor," the warden said. I glanced over and saw that one of the guards Danny had hit was within reach of his handgun. He didn't look interested in reaching for it. "You see, it is all over, Danny," the warden said. "I don't think so. This is my sanctuary. I decide when it is over. We'll never get along until you fully realize that. It's over for me," Danny said. "But I think it is just beginning for you." The warden smiled. "You're forgetting something, my friend. I hold the keys. Keep that tone and you'll earn yourself another trip below." Danny spoke as if he hadn't heard the man. "You've broken too many laws. And ruined too many lives now. We'll let the courts decide what happens to me, but I already know what they will decide about you. Don't be a child, Danny. No one will ever even know any of this took place. It happens all the time. And now you've demonstrated that you're no different from me. You've just killed to save your precious lamb. I killed only in self-defense. You have no rights to defend yourself here. Put the gun down and God may forgive you this time." Bruce Randall stepped away from the wall, walked up to the warden from behind, and brought both fists down on the man's head with enough force to crack a log. Marshal Pape grunted once and dropped like a rock. He lay on the floor, legs bent oddly under his torso, breathing but unconscious, all but Bruce Randall, who lifted his foot and was about to bring it down on the warden's head when Danny cut him short. "Leave him," he said. Randall stared at him, foot cocked. He's suffered enough. Randall hesitated a second, then lowered his foot. The other inmates stared, still stunned by what they'd witnessed. Danny nodded and faced the guards, who were clearly in shock. Everything will come to light and California's going to erupt. I'll take whatever punishment the courts decide is fair for what I've done, but you must know that you will as well. I doubt they will be very kind. Tell me if I'm wrong. None of them spoke. With Book.2 gone and the warden out, they were like lost sheep, not unlike the prisoners. I felt a stab of pity for them. You can side with the warden and go down with him, or you can stand up for justice. Either way, Renee must be set free. Now, do you understand? I'm going to escort her out of here, and then you can take me into custody. He was going to send me away. The thought terrified me. No, Danny. I pushed myself to my feet. Danny faced me and our eyes met. He was bleeding. His life was in danger. He had to get to a hospital as quickly as possible. But I was thinking something else as I walked toward him. You're leaving with me, I said. Renee, tears misted his eyes again, the good kind, pressed out by the gentle hand of Danny's loving God. I stepped up to him and lifted a finger to his lips. Shish, I've spoken to a judge, I whispered. He'll set you free. I didn't know it to be a fact, but I was sure that Judge Thompson could be persuaded. Danny looked unsure. I had to be careful what I said in the hearing of others. The one who knows your case. He'll set you free. Trust me, I have a way. You didn't do what they put you in here for. You're wrongly imprisoned. That was true. I had killed the 2 men he'd confessed to killing. I can't live without you, Danny. Not anymore. You have to be free to take care of me until we grow old. I saw it in his eyes, a terrible love that quieted any other reason or logic, however well informed. I stood to my tiptoes, brought my lips to his cheek and kissed him lightly. You did well, my love, I whispered. You did very well. Now take me away from this hell. Danny faced the guards, hesitated one moment, then nodded once. We're leaving now, he said. We're going to set things straight. Do you understand? The correctional officers glanced at each other, then nodded. I think they wanted us to leave. I think they wanted us to tell the world about what had happened because, out from under the warden's thumb, they wanted to set things straight as well. No one will stop. Epilogue. 2 months later. It's amazing how much power the courts hold to define deviant behavior on the winds of social change and law. Jesus didn't condemn slavery, but that was 2,000 years ago. I'm glad to say our judge used the law as he saw fit. In this case, to our benefit. Under my threat to expose his connection to his son's crimes, Judge Thompson directed me to an investigator, one Raymond Kingerman, who filed a petition to reopen Danny's case. As it turned out, Danny's confession became his strongest ally, because, armed with that confession, the district attorney hadn't conducted a full review of the physical evidence. Danny withdrew his confession because it was in fact untrue. I, not he, had killed the 2 victims in question, though we neglected to inform them of this detail. Apart from that confession, there was nothing that linked Danny to the murders. Judge Thompson reviewed the case and overturned the conviction based on lack of physical evidence. In a separate ruling, he also found that the deaths of Keith Hammond and Captain Book.2 were a matter of self-defense under California law. With a few strokes of the pen, Danny became a free man, 7 weeks less. One day after I broke into prison to save him. For 4 of those weeks I waited in limbo, afraid that I would go to prison for breaking in. In the end I was absolved, primarily due to the extenuating circumstances and the department's desire to keep the matter quiet. Basil was no more. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation transferred all of its inmates to other facilities and shut down the prison pending a full review. Warden Marshall Pape was awaiting trial and would likely spend many years if not the rest of his life, behind bars. That left Danny and me free to embrace life together, two lovers bound together by the kind of profound affection and loyalty that can only really be forged by a lifetime of harsh reality. We were free, yes, but in our own ways we were each in our own kind of prison. I still caged by my obsessive-compulsive mind, and Danny by a history that will probably haunt him to his grave. On the eve of his release, we walked hand in hand, beach, carrying our flip-flops as dusk settled over California's coastline. We hadn't talked about what had gone through Danny's mind in the last moment before he snapped and saved me. I thought the topic was too personal to broach before we knew exactly where fate would land us. But now we were free, and I was doing backflips inside. Danny had saved me. I had saved Danny. Nothing could separate us now. Nothing. I looked at the bare sand smoothed by receding waves. It was like a clean slate, a fresh start. Freedom is a beautiful thing, I said. He frowned and stared at the shoreline. It is. And yet so few really are free. Nearly all people live in prisons of their own making, regardless of their faith, creed, sex, or race. That's my Danny. Pape called Basil his sanctuary. In truth, we all exist in our own sanctuaries, but I don't mean cathedrals or prisons. I'm talking about our hearts and minds, which imprison us in anxiety, fear, insecurity, anger, and other forms of misery. The walls and bars that keep most in a constant state of suffering are thoughts and emotions, not concrete and steel. It's a disease. Insanity. Most are afflicted by it, regardless of which side of the law they find themselves on or where they lay their heads at night. To be free of this, Renee, is to be free indeed. Still, I'd rather sleep in my own bed at night, I said. He grinned. And so would I. So would I. Danny. Can I ask you a question about that day? He hesitated, but his voice was strong when he answered. Of course. I'd rehearsed the phrasing of the thoughts that plagued me for weeks. You were once a priest who used violence to protect the innocent. That is true. And you then took a vow of nonviolence, because violence isn't consistent with your understanding of love. That is also true. You endured terrible pain in the prison, standing by that principle. Yes. I nodded. So are you still committed to nonviolence? He spoke without a moment's pause. Of course. I looked up at him as we walked, and he turned his face to smile at me. But you snapped in the prison. You saved me. What was your reason? Danny looked ahead, smile fading. I had no reason, he said. I surrendered all of it in a moment of clarity. I didn't snap. I became fully aware for the first time. Danny is a man who lives by reason. His logic is impeccable. Knowledge and certainty guide every aspect of his life. And yet he had surrendered his reason. I had to know more. Then why did you kill Keith, and those other men? What did you see? That I had to save you. That's all. I could argue that Keith had already given up his right to life and stepped into death when he took you, that I was only finishing what he'd committed himself to, but that's not what went through my mind. Or through my emotions, for that matter. I simply did what I knew I must for your sake. Keith gave up his right to life. I'd heard the argument before. Then your love for me was stronger than your logic, I said. Because your own logic rejects violence in any case. True. Love has its own logic that sometimes defies the mind. I didn't act out of my mind or my emotions, but from a deeper place of light and perfect peace. Perhaps for the first time in my life I truly found God. I have no other way to understand what happened to me in that moment. But you still don't believe in violence. I would never hurt another human being. It's inconsistent with my understanding of love, and if someone came to kill me, I would stop him, Danny said. By any means necessary. Why? Because I love you. I can't say I was disappointed. In fact, I found his conviction exhilarating, all reason aside. My heart was pounding as we walked through the soft sand. So you would never hurt another man, for any reason. That's right. But if a man came to kill me, I would stop him. He gave me a gentle look, wearing a whimsical smile. And, my love, if you loved yourself as much as I love you, you might find yourself free of the prisons that hold you. In the meantime, I will love us both. Spoken like a good priest. Spoken by one whose mind has been broken. Thank God. We were both silent for a few seconds. What would Danny do? He would lay down even his sound reasoning for me. It's a mystery I doubt I'll ever be able to explain. But we can smile at that mystery rather than try to understand what is by definition unknowable. It defies the mind. It's not a matter of the mind or the emotions. The truth is, the only key that will unlock the prisons we all live in is love. Unconditional love, like God's. And even that is a mystery. I loved him for his mysteries. They'd saved my life and brought me back into his arms. Danny. Yes. Will you always take care of me? I live to take care of you. Will you allow me to love you forever? It will be my greatest honor. Everything in me was like warm water. I was drowning in a sea of beautiful, unreasonable love. My mind was telling me I should be saying something appropriate. That I should kiss him and tell him how proud I was of him. I should make sure he knew that I would die for him as quickly as he would for me. Instead, I spoke the only words that made it to